Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and welcome to the next episode of The Hard Compound Live. For those of you who don't know, my name is Rich and I run and operate The Hard Compound. We're a one-stop shop for all things motorsport. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Excuse me. And we put out 2 or 3 posts a day on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter in the form of any breaking news, car reveals, any new liveries. And we do throwbacks on this day's birthdays, race reviews, race previews, and all that good stuff, covering everything from the British Touring Car Championship to F1, World Touring Cars to IndyCar, NASCAR, to the World Rally Championship, and bikes as well, and anything else we can shake a stick at. So do come and give us a follow on those platforms: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Just search for The Hard Compound and you will find us. Come and give us a follow so you don't miss out. In case you hadn't noticed, we also do live interviews such as this one tonight. These are automatically recorded as well in case you have to dash off for any reason or if you've missed the start. These are on our Facebook, our Twitter, and our YouTube channels only. Sadly, not on Instagram. They're all saved as well in the video section on our Facebook and in the live section on our YouTube channel. We've had some fantastic guests in the past. I'm not going to name them all because we're up into the 90s now in terms of guests. But as I said, we've covered a number of series, I guess, from across the motorsport spectrum. From the world of F1 and IndyCar and sports car, we've spoken with the likes of Mr. Mario Andretti and Mr. Jackie Ix, which is absolutely superb. Being able to speak with them. We've also spoken with the likes of Mr. Mika Salo, with Will Power, Carl Wendlinger, Alex Caffey, Perry McCarthy, Mark Blundell, Derek Warwick, David Brabham, Stefan Johansson, Eddie Cheever, Emanuele Pirro, and many others. We've also spoken with a number of people from the world of touring cars. We've spoken with Andy Prio, Steve Soper, Rob Gravitt, John Cleland. We've spoken with Dick Bennett, the boss of West Surrey Racing. We've spoken with Frank Sittner, Matt Neal, Jason Plato, Ivan Muller, Gabriele Tarquini, Fabrizio Giovanardi, Tom Coronel, many others of that ilk as well. We've also spoken with Mr. Terry Fullerton, Ayrton Senna's great rival. We've spoken with like Kenny Atchison, Ari Lyondike, with Danny Sullivan, Alonso Jr. Happy birthday, Al, by the way, and many others. So do go and check those out, but don't do it just yet. I mentioned that we've spoken to a lot of touring car drivers, and if you're tuning in tonight, that's probably why you're watching, because we have another fantastic guest. He's actually a man who won the very first British Touring Car Championship race I ever watched back in 1988. He is raced in the British Touring Car Championship. He's raced in the production saloons. He's raced in the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and is a very successful businessman among many other things. He hasn't been involved in motorsport for a while, but he is back tonight. We're absolutely delighted on that fact. So without any further ado, please join me in extending a very warm welcome to a man I've been wanting to speak to since I was about 7. The brilliant Mr. Jerry Mahony.
Hi, Rich. Evening, everyone.
Jerry, how are you?
I'm well, thanks, Rich. Yeah.
Excellent.
Flattered that you want to talk to me and that anyone's even interested, but there we are.
There are plenty of people interested. I think as we've said in the past, you're from the era where folks of my kind of age, we kind of grew up watching you guys, and it's always fantastic to hear from you. As I mentioned, we've spoken to some of your peers. We've spoken with Rob and Steve and John and Graham Good and all those guys, and it's fantastic that you're back and you're back with us. And so thank you very much for coming on and having a chat. I really appreciate it.
Well, it was, as you probably know, it was Rob that talked me into doing this because since my altercation or my moment of madness in 2005, I've kind of kept my head down, and I get invited to a lot of races and by lots of different people and friends. And I've really, because of my embarrassment and everything, I've kept away. And Rob felt, and has felt for a long time, because Rob Gravitt and I go back 35 years, that it would be beneficial to do this. I've been aware for about 10 years that there's a really big following for the RS 500 cars and that era, because I have been sort of exchanging stories with Paul Linford, who ran the RS 500 club, or still does, and is probably the premier authority on those cars. He knows more about my racing car than I know myself. He's just lives and what breathes RS 500. So even 10 years ago, I was kind of exchanging emails with people who follow that era, like yourselves, and are really keen. But I've kept away from racing since 2004, I suppose,
Sure.
since I was locked up. Ah, now that's good. I've got a rum and
Oh,
lovely. That's it. Cheers. Thank you. You don't
fantastic.
mind if I just
Oh no, you sip away. No problem. Just want to say,
lubricate the cogs.
yes, please do. Um,
Mm.
just while we're on that subject,
Oh, shit, that's strong.
we
Sorry.
it's a rum and rum.
Yeah,
We do need to say a huge thanks to Rob Granite, who obviously
sure.
put us in touch. So thank you very much, Rob. If you are tuning in or if you're watching this back, it's very much appreciated. I've seen that Mandy Gravitt's tuning in. She's just said hello, Mandy,
Yeah,
and
she rang me.
I've just
Yeah.
seen that Paul Linfoot is here. Paul Linfoot is in the house. So greetings,
Oh,
Paul.
okay.
Do hope you're well. I've already had a few comments saying, an old school BTCC driver who wouldn't be interested. My sentiments. Exactly. So firstly, thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. Very much appreciated. If you've got any questions, do put them in the comment section. We will come to them as and when we can, work them in at an opportune moment. Or if you just want to have a chat amongst yourselves, then please do. Yeah, I guess we've got quite a lot to get through, and we're going to try and get through as quick as we can without missing any of the brilliant details, which I know are coming because we've had a chat off air. And get ready, folks. Get comfortable because this is going to be great. So I guess the best place to start is right at the start. You weren't initially interested in motorsport when you were young that much, really, were you, or was it?
Well, not really. I suppose I was taken to Thruxton when it reopened, which must have been about 67 or 68. And I remember Jochen Rindt was racing in Formula 2, and there was a saloon car race, sort of Mini Coopers, Anglias, and a chap called Jerry Marshall was racing in that, and that's quite pertinent because he crops up later, as you know. But no, I didn't really. I'd sort of messed about, as you do as kids. I hadn't really done any karting or anything like that, and didn't have the money, as is always the case, until I was in my late 20s to even look at racing. But I had an interest in it. I love Graham Hill, for example. He to me was the architectural playboy sort of Formula One driver, good all round guy, and as a schoolboy, he was sort of my hero, I suppose.
Yeah, quite a guy to be drawn to. I think, yeah, a lot of people were drawn to him. Not all male, obviously. That's fairly obvious. But yeah, he had that look, didn't he, at the time? I'm sure.
Yeah, really, really good guy.
Which was terrific.
His son wasn't anything like him, I have to say. Damon's a lot more introvert, and is not as outgoing. Not that I knew Graham, but I knew Damon, and Damon's much quieter sort of chap,
Yeah, from what I can gather, Damon's a lot more like his mother, in that respect, perhaps. I'm not sure. But again, what a great guy he is as well. So when you obviously had the interest in motorsport, but you weren't sort of initially looking at the driving side. You kind of followed like a business path, didn't you, into garages, things like that?
Yeah, I don't want to go into my whole sort of how I started out in life, obviously, but basically when I was in my late teens, I was selling motorbikes for a company called Motorcycle City, which was a big national company, and I ran their business at Bedfont. I was manager of the showroom at quite a young age. I'd started off with them when I was about 17 or 18. But I wanted to get married to Kim, who I'm still married to now. I wanted to buy a house, and they wouldn't give me enough money to buy a house. So I actually left a steady job, and of all things, I got a Tony Bell ice cream van. This is which we didn't cover the other night, but quite a lot of my
That's
friends
new
know
for
that
me.
story. And I actually, in those days, you rented the van from Tony Bell, but you had to buy their products. And I got the Windsor round, which was one of the best rounds, and you can earn a lot of money, particularly in the winter, because in the winter the rent for the van was only £8 a week, but in the summer it went up to 60. Now, hang on, everyone's saying £8 a week. Do remember we're talking about mid 70s, so it's different sort of money.
Sure.
So I got established with the ice cream van business, and ended up having races with the Mr. Whippy van, on Sunday when we used to sell block ice cream all round Windsor. And then in the winter, in the depths of winter, I started selling hot dogs from the ice cream van, which was only moderately successful because I ate most of the stock, which wasn't really the way to do it. So anyway, I got rid of the ice cream van, got enough money together to buy a house. Kim and I got married, and I pretty much straight away started buying and selling cars. Then I got my first showroom in Ashvale. I built that business pretty quickly and ended up with 3 garages. And but my passion in life was sailing. I was a very, very keen sailor. And I bought actually, I think it was the 1979 Earls Court Boat Show. I bought a new 35-foot sailing boat, and we used to keep that on the handle. And I learnt my craft for sailing, charging around the English Channel and the Channel Islands. And there was no sat nav in those days or anything. It was all dead reckoning and things like that. So here I am with a sailing boat. I had a young wife. We didn't have any kids. And a friend of mine was taking his boat to Spain and offered me the chance to sail it down there with him. There was actually 5 of us, but I sailed down there with him. And to cut a long story short, we ended up in a place called Estepona, which is between Gibraltar and Malaga. And I had to fly back to the UK because I'd been gone for the best part of 2 weeks. And I hired a little car to take me to Malaga Airport. My flight back to London was at 7 o'clock that night. And John, the guy whose boat it was, said, look, leave a bit earlier and stop at this place on the way called Porto Banús. Now, I'd never been to southern Spain before. So I got in this little Fiesta, I think it was, and I drove down towards Marbella, and I stopped at this place called Porto Banús, parked the car, walked in there, and it's full of, as it still is, with these gin palaces. And I went to a bar on the corner called Sinatra's Bar, and it's still there. And I got in there drinking and just talking to people and chatting as one does. The problem was I was still there at 2 in the morning. So my flight was at 7. I stayed there all night. And basically we're talking to these guys who were down with their boats in Porto Banús, and they were going off sailing around the Med, the next summer. This was in about September. I think September of 79 or 80 or something. Anyway, I had this 5-hour conversation with them, left Porto Banús, flew back to the UK, and said to Kim, right, I'm selling the garages. We'd already sold the house because we were buying a better house. So the house was under offer. I said, I'm selling the garages. I've had enough bloody selling cars. I'm going to sail the boat to Spain. I said, we're going to sail around the Med. And Kim, who, bless her, was, I don't know how old she was then, probably not even 19 or 20, or I don't know. She said, well, I'm not coming. And I said, well, suit yourself, I'm going. And it wasn't until 2 weeks before that she decided to go. So I'm going to get through this next bit quickly because I don't want to get too bogged down in this. So we sailed off down to Spain. We spent a year sailing around the Med and going to the Balearics and everything else. And we lived on the boat. And when I say we lived on the boat, I've never been into roughing it, and camping. I like to have a shower every day and all that sort of thing. So for me to live on a boat, it's got to be comfortable. But we had a wonderful time. Most of the people were older than us. They were kind of my age now, in their 60s, retired people. So we spent a year doing that. Went back to Marbella. I was kind of bored by then because I was, I don't know, 25, 26. And I started looking at just things that I could do. And I saw an opportunity down there that I could probably sell boats. And I was just beginning to get that off the ground. And I got talked into buying half of a restaurant and beach bar 500 miles up the coast in Calpe, which is just the other side of Alicante. So Kim and I went up there and we ran this restaurant and beach bar for a year with another couple. And it went really well. The restaurant was a high-end restaurant, sort of right by the sea, and we had a beach bar, and it was fantastic. And we did the season, we did really well. And at the end of the season, Colin, who was my partner, who was older than me, he said, you popping back to the UK? I said, yeah, we're going back. And he said, well, when are you coming back? And I said, well, I'm not. And he said, what do you mean you're not? I said, I'm Colin, I'm not going to do this. And he said, but we've had a great year. I said, yeah, we've had a great year. We've been busy, but there's no money in it. I said, you can't take the Spanish on at this game because we'd had a great year and you could earn a living, but I was kind of looking for more. Cool. So anyway, we went back. I had a deal with him for him to buy me out. And I went back down to Marbella, and that's when I established the boat business in the early 80s down there. And that turned it into a fantastic business. I sold Sunseeker boats. I was the agent for Sunseeker of southern Spain, who were the best manufacturer. They built, probably like they still do, the best boats. And Donzi, which was the Ferrari of American boats. And in those days, everything was Miami Vice type boats. Everything did 80 or 90 miles an hour, had big V8s in, and they were a real fast. That was Marbella in the 80s. I mean, it was a fantastic place to live.
Wow.
And so I did that. But then we had another flea in the woodpile. Kim got pregnant, which we weren't happy about. But Spain wasn't like it is now. I mean, they weren't even in the EEC then. And she said, well, I'm pregnant. I'm not going to have a baby over here. There's sort of sawdust on the floors of the hospitals and things. So I had to buy a house back in the UK. And I bought a house in a village called Heytesbury, which isn't far from here in Wiltshire. And then I started commuting. And I would come back every other weekend. I would fly back on a Friday afternoon to Gatwick or Heathrow and then get my car, drive down to Wiltshire. Sometimes I'd drive back. And I could leave Marbella on a Saturday night, because that was the time to leave, about 5 o'clock. And I could do it in 26 hours. And that was before the Channel Tunnel, just stopping for fuel.
Wow.
And I had one of those, at the time, one of those new 16-valve Cosworth Mercedes had just come out. Right. And that thing would just sit at 140 miles an hour, all the way up through Bordeaux and up through Spain. And so I was used to driving for long periods, which actually would stand me in good stead a few years later when I
Mm.
started endurance racing. And that's really how I got into Spain. But when I was flying backwards and forwards, I usually used to buy a magazine to read on the flight. And I used to buy a magazine, I think that was called Cars International. And I used to buy that magazine because there was a really good journalist in there who used to write really funny articles, and his name was Jeremy Clarkson.
Never
Long
heard of him.
before he was
Who's
well
that?
known. But he used to, he'd slag off marinas and things, and
Yeah,
much of the stuff he does online.
things don't
And
change.
it was on one of these flights, I was thumbing through this Cars International, and there was a picture, a whole page picture, and an article about Mike Smith, who was at that time a Radio 1 DJ, and he was pictured beside a new Sierra Cosworth, which hadn't actually been released at that time thereabout, and it was all painted in Mobil 1 colours, and he was dressed in a Mobil 1 race suit. He was very well known, and the article was about how he was going to race this car in the Production Saloon series in 1987. And I kind of looked at this and I thought, well, you want something to do, racing. You've always fancied yourself as a bit of a driver. And I kind of liked the idea. I'd already started flying by this time, by the way. So I was flying helicopters and things, but that was exciting, but didn't quite give me the buzz. Driving a fast powerboat, a 45-foot powerboat across the water at 90 miles an hour, that gave me a real buzz.
Right.
But as did sailing at one time. But yeah, so I came back and decided I was going to go motor racing.
Wow.
And I just bought Kim a new XR2. I called it the skitter car because it used to aquaplane everywhere. And she actually hated it. So, but I knew the local Ford dealer, and I went down to see him, and I said, "Look, there's a new Sierra Cosworth coming out. Can you get me one?" Well, to sell Sierra Cosworth, then you had to be what they called an RS dealer, not just a Ford dealer, but an RS dealer. And he said, "Well, they're in short supply, but you're a good customer, and our branch in somewhere in Somerset's an RS dealer." And he said, "Yeah, I can definitely get you one." So I said, "Right, put my name down and get me one." So that was that. So here I am. I know nothing about racing. I know nothing about anything to do with racing, but I've got a Sierra Cosworth on one. So I'm now, how am I going to go racing with this car? I mean, you can't. But I knew two names. And one name I knew was a guy by the name of Andy Rouse. And I knew that name because Andy had won, I think, the British Saloon Car Series in an XR4 Ti or something. And every night before news at 10 for about 3 months, Ford ran this advert for these XR4s. And it was kind of, and it went something like, and it made Andy Rouse the saloon car champion. So I knew that name, and I knew the name, remembered the name Jerry Marshall from when I was a kid. I'd seen race, and he was a bit of a name. So initially, I tried to contact this Andy Rouse character, and I found his number in Coventry. He had a workshop in Coventry. And I eventually managed to speak to him, and he obviously just thought I was a complete idiot. And he said, no, I'm 87, I'm doing world touring cars or something, and I'm not going to do that. And he said, I said, well, have you got any ideas of anyone who would be able to help me? And he said, no, not really. There's a guy at Silverstone called Roger Dowson. But anyway, that was that. Then I managed to get hold of this Jerry Marshall character, who ran a garage in Tring called Marshall Wingfield. And I rang him up, and he again just said, listen, you won't get a Sierra Cosworth because everyone wants them and no one can get them. He said, you cannot go in with no experience in the production saloon series because it's the most, he said, I race in it. It's the most competitive series. He said, you'd be way out of your class. And he said, you won't get a car anyway. No one can get them. And he more or less dismissed me. And I mentioned that I knew a chap called Dave Coyne. And Dave Coyne raced fairly successfully very successfully years ago in Formula Ford and stuff. So Marshall, unbeknown to me, he's put the phone down. He's rung Dave Coyne. I don't know what Dave Coyne said to him, but Jerry Marshall rang me back and said, look, why don't you drive up here and, you know, have some lunch. So I drove up there and we had some lunch. We went in the pub, of course. I got on really well with Jerry because Jerry was like me in terms of he liked to drink and that sort of thing. And he wouldn't accept that I was ever going to get a Cosworth because they were just so short. He said, you know, this well-known racing people want them and there's just not enough to go around. And he said, look, you can't go into that series. You want to try something else. So I said, no, I want to do that series. So anyway, he mentioned this Dowson name again, which was fine. But I rang Dowson and couldn't speak to him. And in the end, I ended up driving up to Silverstone to try and meet him. And he kind of dismissed me as a waste of time. And he said I wouldn't get a car either. And I mean, I was in a service business in terms of my boat business, and I couldn't believe that these people would treat me like, you know, I'm a customer standing there.
Potential customer. Yeah. And
I was kind of dismissed. So, but I was also worried because people kept telling me I wouldn't get a Cosworth. And I actually didn't have an order. I only had a sort of personal word from my local Ford dealer. So when I flew back to the UK the following week, I actually spoke to my Ford dealer sort of tongue in cheek. And he said, no, I've got you penciled in for one in December. He said, it's definitely coming, definitely down to you. So that was fine. I kind of waited for the car. I got the car and I thought, right, I rang up Jerry Marshall. I said, right, I've got the car. And he didn't believe me. And he even asked me for the registration number. This Jerry, I mean, in a nice way. I gave him the registration number, D something. So, and he said, how the fuck did you get that? He said, no one can get them. I said, well, I just ordered it from my local Ford dealer. Anyway, so I had the car. So he said, who are you going to get to run it? I said, well, I haven't got anyone. I said, I've got no one. And this is now December 86. And he said, well, what happened with Dowson? I said, well, he wouldn't even talk to me. He just treated me like a fool. He said, well, he's definitely the man to run the car, but just watch him with the money. He's expensive, you know. So I thought, well, how am I going to deal with this? So I thought, right, what I'll do, I'll get Christmas over with. I'll run around in the car, which I did. And then after the Christmas break, I picked the phone up. Phone was answered. Hello, Dowson Engineering, and it was his wife, the lady on the phone, the fierce lady, as I called her. And she said, "Hello, Dowson Engineering." I said, "Oh, hi, is Roger there?" She said, "Yes, who's calling?" I said, "Okay, thank you." Put the phone down and got in the car and drove it straight to Silverstone. Parked it outside Dowson's workshop. Went in the reception. His wife was there again, and she said, "Hello." I said, "Hi, I brought the Sierra up." "Oh," she said, "yes, I remember. Sierra." I said, "Yeah, I got a new Cosworth out there. I brought it up to show you." So she then disappeared out of the reception through a door that I thought was probably the workshop.
Right.
2 minutes later, she's come back in with this Roger Dowson, who I hadn't met. He said, "Oh, I didn't get to meet you last time." I said, "No, you weren't interested." He said, "Well, you've got a car. You better come in the office." So I went in the office, and we agreed terms. He'd build the car and whatever. And he thought I was mad, absolutely, completely mad, going into what was then the Uniroyal Production Saloon series. I mean, at that time, Tim Harvey, Lawrence Bristow, Rob Gravitt, Mike Smith, Marshall, Lant Framke, Sean Brown. I mean, Dave Morgan, ex-Formula 3. There was a whole raft of people running in Class A.
It's a proper lineup, isn't it?
Huh?
That's
Yeah,
a proper lineup of people.
In the meantime, I've gone back to Spain, and one of my really good customers was a chap called Derek Masters, and Derek Masters was had a company in the UK called Aquati, but Aquati was the English arm of a really big Italian company that's actually still going. And I said to Derek, "Look, I bought this racing car. I bought this car. I'm going to race. I'm going to get it. I'm having it run by a professional team. I want to get it all painted up, but I don't want to go out there with a white car." I said, "Can we put it in your corporate colours, and your graphic people can draw it all up, and you give me a bit of money, just, I don't want lots, but just give me something." And Derek said, "Yeah, that's okay." He said, "I'll give you £1,000 a race," which is like £5 a race now.
Yeah.
And he said, "We'll sort out what it looks like." So he drew up all the livery for it. And the livery of the production saloon was very similar to the touring car, which most people know. And the car was built over the winter. The engine was going to be built by Terry Drury, who's another very well known sort of, he unfortunately passed away now, but he was well known at the time as a bit of a lad. He built the engines. So we got to March, and I'd been up and seen this car being built. And I mean, Dowson, there's no doubt about it, he was a fantastic engineer. And the car he built was, I mean, you could eat your dinner off it. It was fantastic. Wow. And it was all painted. And I'd had this race suit made by LeBeau Racewear, that it was a proper one in all red and the red and green colours. And we were coming to the time where the car was finished before the first race. And I'd flown back from Spain to get up to Silverstone to test the car for the first time. I guess it would have been February '87. So I've got up to Silverstone really early and gone to Dowson's workshop. Well, Jenny, his wife, said, "Well, they're all over in the centre. The car's already over there. They're over there waiting for you." And she told me how to get over the bridge and go to the garages. And sure enough, I saw Dowson Engineering van. I thought, that's it. Got out the car, got my bag out, walked into this garage. Fuck me, there must have been 15 people in there. And with the bonnet up on this Sierra, it's ticking over. And I thought, oh shit, where are all these people? Who the hell are they? Well, of course, this was actually the first Sierra Cosworth that was going to run, because there were a lot being built to race, but mine was one of the first out. And there were RAC scrutineers there because they were talking about putting restrictors in the turbo, which they did end up doing to try and slow them down, which didn't actually work. And there were people, there were engine builders there and different people. And I just opened the door at the back of the garage, and I stood there looking at all these people and thought, shit, what the fuck have you got yourself into here? And so I got taken to the front of the car, and there's Terry Drury and one of his guys underneath fiddling with something. And Roger said, "Well, we're going to be ready to go out, so you better get changed." So I'm now in this brand new, fantastic race suit with a fantastic looking car going out, and I've never been on the racetrack. And I was standing at the back of the car having got changed, and I looked at the back of the car, and there was a yellow square with a black cross on it. And I said to Roger, "What's what's that cross on the back? He said, oh, that's to let everyone know you're a novice. I said, oh, right, okay. And
Make
that
it
would
away.
be quite pertinent in months to come, that black cross, because that ended up being a red rag to a bull to a lot of drivers. But I thought, well, I got in the car, they bolted me in, they said, go out, do a couple of laps. Anyway, I did all the sort of bedding in stuff and whatever, and then came in. Roger said, right, you get your foot down, try and go a bit quicker. So I went round, did a few more laps, and then they hung the board out. No times, just an in. So I came in and I'm sitting in the car in front of the garage. And Roger came over and there were still loads of people milling around. And he said, how did that feel? I said, yeah, okay. I said, it's a bit loose on the back end, but I said, yeah, it's okay. So he said, well, should be okay. You're about a second and a half under the lap record at the moment, which I said, are you serious? He said, yeah, which sounds impressive, but those Cosworths were so fast that they were all under the lap record. But the fact I was the first one to run, it was kind of, and that was really how the first day of testing went. There was another journalist there called a chap called Mark Hales, who would again turn out to be quite involved in my career because Mark had been there because it was the first running of competitive Cosworth, and he'd been out on the track watching me. And he came and said, how'd you get on? You look like you're enjoying yourself out there. I said, yeah, it was fun. He said, yeah, you did some good time. But he said, just imagine how quick you'd go if you weren't going sideways so much. Rally car. So that was quite interesting, you know, and that led into the first race, March '87. And I'm just going to go through this quickly because people will be getting bored with all this stuff. But my first race was at Silverstone on the club circuit, which is basically a triangle. And it was teeming down. I mean, it was like no let up in March.
Oh, crikey.
But by some miracle, I qualified second, which was surprising. And Mike Smith was on pole. And basically, my first race, I charged round, pushed Mike all the way round. What did come second, but got fastest lap. Beat Dave Morgan, the ex-Formula 3 guy, I think, who was third. And I was really chuffed to be second in the race. I got awarded the Crompton Driver of the Day award as well, which was quite nice. And that was the start of it. And then the whole of '87 was, you know, that because I pretty much ran at the front most of the time. I don't think I've won that many races, maybe 4 or 5, because Rob won most of them. And but I was always second or third or thereabouts. And there was there were 12 Cosworths out there, and it was very, very competitive. And of course, I mean, Tim Harvey, he was the star in those days. He was younger than I was. He raced in the production series with a 2-car Estelle Sierra Cosworth team, him and Lawrence Bristow. He raced in the British Touring Car Championship in a Rover, the Estelle Rover, and I think was winning that. And he was seen as the star of the future. Well, he was really pissed off that this guy with a cross on was, you know, quite a lot of the time I was leading, you know, and
So
but of course, you know,
he was the bull who saw.
yeah. I mean, it did
He
piss
saw
a
the
lot
rag.
of people off that I was, you know, right at the front end of it, because you leave the cross on till you got 5 signatures or something. But of course, the third race, we're back at Silverstone, and I smashed the car to pieces completely. I tried to overtake Dave Morgan on the outside of the corner, and I just went straight into the sleepers at the bottom of the straight and absolutely totaled the car, smashed it to pieces. Had to be reshelled.
Oh, crikey.
and that was kind of it. But we, during this time, I got to know Rob. Mike Smith, who was with his partner, Sarah Green, they were kind of the posh and becks of the era because Mike was a real big star. He was
Yeah.
on the breakfast show and he used to talk about the racing on a Monday morning. After he'd raced, he'd be on Radio 1 talking about what had happened and used to talk about Rob and myself and other people who were in the race and what happened. And he was never given, Mike was always given, not bad press by the motorsport press, but he was never given the credit that he deserved because he promoted motorsport a lot just by the fact of he was a big star in the eyes of the British public, you know.
And he kind of had the outlet with the radio and everything. And
Yeah, I mean, he promoted and he brought a lot of people in. I mean, a lot of people used to come to the races to see him, you know. But we got in '87, we got friendly with Rob and Mandy and Mike and Sarah, and we used to stay a lot of the hotels together and stuff. And I mean, the things that would go on. I mean, at that time, no one knew who the hell I was, but everyone knew who Mike was.
right.
And we'd stay in hotels. And unfortunately, my behaviour when I'm behaving well is completely out of control. You know, even now, I'm nearly 70 and I'm still a bloody idiot. But in those days, we'd stay in the hotels. And of course, I would be on the alcohol the night before, as most of us used to be, even in touring cars. We'd be on vintage port and everyone would have raving hangovers in the morning. But I remember one particular hotel we stayed in. I can't remember the name of the hotel, but I do remember we were racing at Mallory Park. And in the center of this rather nice restaurant, this hotel, was this hansom cab. Now, for those of you who don't know what a hansom cab is, it's like an 1800s taxi that they used to have in London, where the people go inside and the driver sits up on a platform behind. It has a horse. And I managed to talk Mike into getting up onto the back of this hansom cab. And I got between where the horse was and I started pushing it round the restaurant. And I ended up tipping him on the sweet trolley amongst all the trifle and stuff. But I mean, you'd think the people in the restaurant would have gone mad, but they didn't. They didn't care because it was Mike Smith and whatever it was, anything went. And we used to have so much fun, you know. And
Wow. Oh,
they were
goodness.
great days. I mean, I think if you speak to, I mean, the touring car days got better, but certainly '87 was a fantastic year socially. But the other thing was the Sierras were very unreliable.
Right.
They very rarely finished you know, a 10-lap sprint. They would break down and blow head gaskets. So we had the wheel hire 24 hours coming up. And Rob, who was by this time a good friend, Rob and Mandy, Rob was struggling a bit with sponsorship for his car. And we'd all entered the wheel PC who ran it were 10 or 12 Sierras. They'd all be out within about 2 hours.
Right.
And they'd end up with no field. But we got an entry. I think about 8 of us got an entry. And I remember speaking to Derek of Aquati, and I said, look, we're going to do this 24-hour race, which was a big deal in those days, the World Hard 24 hours. And I said, Rob, I mean, he knew who Rob Gravitt was. I said, look, why don't we give him some money? Get Rob to paint his car in our colours. You know, he can wear our race suit. I said, because if either one of us don't finish, you know, you'll have two cars, sort of thing.
There's
So
a
you've got
backup almost. Yeah.
yeah. So Derek agreed, and we gave Rob some money, and my team went mental. They couldn't get their head round it. They said, "What are you doing? Why are you helping your main competitor
Helping your
who's
rival.
racing
Yeah.
against you?" And I said, "Well, he's a friend of mine." I said, "And I'm doing it for Equati, not for me." "Yeah, but you race against him. He beats you, and you know, it doesn't make sense that you're helping." I said, "Well, in my world, it does make sense because it's a commercial decision." So anyway, we all went racing, and of course, the Sierras did last 24 hours. I decided to only do the race with one other driver. I did it with Mark Hales rather than three drivers because 3 hours in, 3 hours out, I'd worked out that, you know, if I'm out the car, I'm still kind of buzzing for the time I'm out. Whereas if you've got three drivers, you're out the car for 6 hours, is too long.
Right.
So Mark and I did it together and it worked very well, just two drivers. Rob did it with three drivers. But the thing was, after 24 hours of racing and hard racing, Rob and I finished less than 30 seconds apart.
Wow.
29 seconds. So we were a 1-2 for Equati. And Mike Smith was third with Lionel Abbott. He was a little bit further back. He'd had some problems. And most of the Cosworths finished. But the thing was, Ford, because the Sierra Cosworth had a bit of a reputation for being unreliable, Ford had booked full page adverts in every newspaper on the Monday morning. And what you had was in the Telegraph and all the papers, you had this picture of Rob's Sierra Cosworth with Equati all over it saying, "Guess how far a Sierra Cosworth can drive in 24 hours?" And they'd so superimposed Rob's car in Red Square in Moscow because the distance we'd driven was London to Moscow. And of course, that got Equati massive coverage. They also went on to say in there under the ad that I'd finished second in a Cosworth, Mike Smith had said, and it kind of destroyed the myth that Cosworths weren't visible.
Right.
And that was
Set the
the
record
high
straight.
point, really, of '87. You know, we had some other things going on that were fun, and we had a lot of fun between us. And I can't remember any of the other stories, so I'm looking at my notes here because
I've
I
got
know
them.
you and I had covered them. But
I mean,
yeah,
just before we hop into the 88, the BTCC
Yeah.
thing, I just want to we've had a few comments. I just want to say hi to everyone who's done it. Lots of people saying this is fantastic stuff. Paul Linfoot, actually, greetings again, Paul. He said, I have had many phone conversations with Jerry. His stories are simply the best. And I've told him to write a book. And Marion Speed has said, write the book.
I can't write a book.
Right. Let's
It
find
wouldn't be
somebody.
fair. It wouldn't be fair to my family, and particularly my wife.
We can just we can do two copies.
Right.
But
the
there's loads of people saying there's no need to worry about everyone getting bored. That's absolutely not the case. Everyone's loving it. Andrew Edwards just said, "What a story! This could be a film." Now there's an idea.
well, we haven't
Who
even
would
got
play him in the film?
yet.
Who could play him in the film?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I was doing, apart from being an idiot in restaurants and Christ knows what else, is I was flying quite a lot. And I decided I wanted to buy a helicopter to get around the place, because the problem was driving to these bloody circuits, and I like to have a drink, and it was getting to the point in the UK where it was becoming socially unacceptable to drink and drive. I mean, for years everyone had, and it was, if you got breathalyzed, it was hard luck, old chap, you know, better luck next time. But it was getting to the point where you couldn't really drink and drive. But I decided, because they don't tend to breathalyze you when you're flying. I know you're not supposed to no, drink and fly, but I did. And that brought about another world because I met other people. When I bought the Jet Ranger, Jonathan Palmer had one. He was racing for Tyrrell in Formula One. He owns all the circuits now. Do you know?
Yeah.
He was. I mean, everyone said I was mad in a helicopter. Let me tell you, Jonathan Palmer was brain dead in a helicopter, and he still flies now, and he's similar age to me. And there's a saying in aviation: you get old pilots and you get bold pilots, but you don't get old, bold pilots. Well, I can tell you, I'm one and Jonathan other, because over the 25, 30 years I was flying, I lost a lot of friends and a lot of pilots got killed because helicopters are amazingly dangerous and they do bite. And as an old man, I wouldn't have flown one, but I flew them and up until I was about 50, and then I got out. But we had a lot of fun with helicopters. And when I got in touring cars, it just got worse because the things that went on. But let me finish off 87 because we had a couple of the prod saloons was one thing, but I got a ride in the TT in 87.
Oh yeah,
in a Holden, and that was a round of the World Touring Car Championship, and I think it was Dowson had sorted something out, and I got to test this Holden, which was Group A, as it was then, and on slicks, and I got to test it at Silverstone, and it had two Belgian drivers, can't remember their names, but I drove this thing around the Silverstone Grand Prix circuit that I knew well because we did a lot of testing on it, and I caused a complete ruckus there because I went quicker than the two regular drivers, and that it didn't cause a problem in the team, it caused a problem with the other drivers, and they weren't very happy with me being in the car. So I got that drive and we did the 87 TT in the absolute pouring rain again. I mean, it was horrendous.
Wow. Right.
A lake all the way around. Won by Roberto Ravaglia in a BMW. We finished directly behind Soper and Udone in the Texaco car, I think.
What,
but we were well down the field. Yeah, no, it sounds. I've said that because it sounds impressive, but we were actually. They'd had a problem, but do you know? Somebody said to me, "What was it like driving the Holden?" I said, "Fantastic." I said the noise it made just really, gives you a second a lap. I reckon if a racing car makes a great noise, it makes you quicker. But I said it was awkward to drive. And they said, "Well, how was it awkward?" I said, "Well, the noise was so great, I had an erection while I was driving it." I said, "It's really difficult driving with an erection." So that was great. I enjoyed going in that, and I got some world championship points. So I was, and the other thing was I had to get a special license. I'd only just got all my signatures, but to race in that World Series, you had to have an FIA license, and there was some grief at the time whether they were going to give me one. But anyway, they did give me one, so that was okay. In the meantime, also in '87. Roger Dowson was an associate member of the BRDC. Jerry Marshall was obviously a member of the BRDC. And I used to go get taken in there a lot, although I wasn't a member, because to become a member, you've got to get certain results in certain levels of motorsport. So I wasn't a member, but I knew a lot of the members, and I used to go in there and talk to people. And one of the people I'd met, amongst many, was James Hunt. James Hunt was a mate of Jerry Marshall's. And I immediately hit it off with James Hunt because I lived in Marbella. And James Hunt had been in Marbella 3 or 4 years before and lived down there. And it turned out him and I visited a lot of the same watering holes. And we were kind of comparing notes on that. And Hunt was an amazing character because he used to turn up quite often at the BRDC in a grey A35 van, which is like a 1960s paedophile's van. That's the only way I could describe it. But he used to like driving that, or an old 450 6.9 Mercedes, always in plimsolls. And so I got to know him quite well. And people names that are real legends, Jackie Stewart, John Surtees, Sterling Moss, all these people I knew, I'd heard about as a schoolboy. I was kind of having drinks with them. Jack Sears, people like that. Really nice guys. And John Surtees turned up a few years later when my son was karting. Henry Surtees was karting as well.
Sure.
And obviously I'd known John Surtees through the club. And obviously when my son was karting a good few years later, and not many people knew who he was, because John Surtees wasn't a kind of in-your-face champion. But,
Sure.
Henry Surtees, as we all know, it was tragic what happened to him in the end. But when he was a young lad, and
real freak accident, wasn't it?
Yeah, 7 and 8. You get these fathers at these karting meetings, and they're like the fathers that stand on the side of football matches, shouting at their kids and swearing at the refs and things. And I remember but speaking to one of these parents who'd been slagging off John Surtees, and I don't know, they said something about his car. And I said, "Do you know who he is?" "Oh, I don't give a fuck who he is." I said, "Well, you ought to have a bit of respect, because this guy not only was world champion on motorcycles, but he is world champion in Formula One as well. He might be older now, and but he needs some respect." And
Absolutely.
these people didn't even know who he was. It was a bit sad, really, and it was even sadder what happened to his son, of course.
Yeah, definitely, of course.
But
wow.
So we
How
had the whole.
who John Surtees is.
Yeah, well, a lot of people didn't, because he wasn't a high-profile champion.
He wasn't.
Quite a quiet man. And then I think Rob was racing. Rob was actually. I'm getting into the truck racing thing now, because that happened in '87 as well.
Right.
And Rob was the works driver for ERF trucks, and Mike Smith drove for Ford in the cargos. And anyway, between Mike and Rob, I managed to get for a test in one of the Ford cargos, which was run by a chap called. The team was run by a chap called Rod Chapman, and there was Mike Smith, a lady called Davina Galitza, who'd raced in Formula One and had been a downhill skier. I think Tony Lanfranchi was in there. Anyway, I got a test in this truck and drove it quite quickly and got to race it at Donington at the end of the year, in the end of '87. And I don't know, but I managed to put the truck on pole position, which I was quite pleased with, my first truck race. And it was actually a rolling start. I mean, they were fucking fast, those trucks. I mean, my road going Sierra Cosworth couldn't keep up with it.
Jeez.
My cargo round Donington. I mean, they were really fast. Maximum. Oh yeah, maximum revs, 2,300 revs, 6-speed gearbox. They weren't autos then, 2-speed axles. We only used 2 gears, but Jesus, they were fast. Anyway, there was a rolling. I was on pole position. can't remember who was next to me, but directly behind me was a chap called Mel Lindsay, who was the European champion in the Works Leyland Road Train. And it was a rolling start. And obviously, in a rolling start, the pole man controls it. But because I wasn't, and racing drivers' excuses coming up now, because I wasn't used to the turbo lag on the truck, I kind of fluffed the start a bit and put my
Right.
foot down, and nothing happened. And Mel Lindsay got alongside me going down to Redgate, kind of on the grass. And I thought, well, I don't know what you're doing out there, man, because by then my truck had come up on boost. So we're going down towards Redgate, but I'm on the track, but he's on the grass. And I thought, well, this is easy sorted out. I'm holding my line. I'm on the track, you're off it. But he
And
realized he was heading for Redgate on the grass. And he then tried to cut in front of me. Of course, he ended up T-boned. His truck went off and smashed itself to pieces and the wall to pieces. And Christ, they stopped the race, and I nearly got lynched, not only by, because Rob and I had arrived in our Aquati race suits, and the truck racing scene was still a bit kind of good old boy stuff.
right.
Probably a bit
Sure.
like NASCAR is in the States.
Yeah.
And,
Quite like
we
an exclusive.
both went, they knew who Mike Smith was, but we all sort of drove quite quickly. And luckily, I got pulled up to the clerk of the courses office, and he was going to throw me out the meeting. And I said, well, before you do that, you need to look at the film in the camera, because Hay Fisher had put a camera in my cab.
Right.
And they looked at the film, and of course, they could see I wasn't at fault. So anyway, they restarted the race, and I won the race. So I won my first truck race as well. So I was really pleased about that.
Wow.
And that was at Donington in, I don't know, October 87, I think.
Crikey.
Yeah. So that
Wow.
kind of rolled up my first season in racing. And it was a bit of a ride, but my God, we had some fun. And I got to drive lots of different things, which was fantastic.
Yeah.
Just had some run.
Yeah. Absolutely. Wow. But I mean, it was a good thing that you had the camera in the truck, and that kind of, excuse me, that sort of leads on to sort of 88 with camera in another cut. But I mean, we've discussed this, and I had no idea until we'd spoken about it on Friday or previously. You were quite the driving force behind getting the BTCC into like the public conscience, I guess, and getting it onto our TVs. And I had no idea that was the case.
It was kind of a bit of a funny story, because I never intended to do Group A, as it was known then, but British touring cars in 88. I was going to do another year in production saloons. Right. Mike Smith had already been chosen to drive the Works BMW alongside Frank Sittner. Rob was trying to get a deal to get together to go into Group A, but I wasn't going to do it. And I'll tell you who changed my mind was Peter Hall. Peter Hall was Andy Rouse's partner, and was the man behind a company called ICS. And he was a very successful businessman, and not a bad driver either. But he was a lot older. I reckon Pete was getting towards 50 at that time. But I was in the BRDC towards the end of the season as a guest, as I was then. And I was talking to Pete Hall, and he was saying, oh, you had a good year. You ought to do touring cars next year. And I said, no. I said, I can't do touring cars. It's far too hard. He said, no, you'll be okay. And he said, they're going to have TV on it next year. And I said, no, I didn't know that. And so I sort of went home with that thought. And I spoke to Roger Dowson and said, look, what do you think about me doing touring cars next year? And he said, well, you need another car. He said, we'll have to build a car. And we talked about what it would cost. And he said, do you think I'll be all right? He said, well, there's a lot more variables, but he said, you know, you're a seat the pants driver. You might be okay. Yeah. I then spoke to Tim Harvey because Tim I knew obviously as a friend, but he raced a Rover in touring cars. And Tim said, no, no, don't even think about it. You can't do it. He said, you've got so many variables, there's slick tires, springs, dampers, ride heights, roll bars. He said, you'll get lost. He says, one thing driving production saloon quickly, but he said, you get into touring cars, it's much more technical. So I took that advice and ignored it completely, of course, and sold my production saloon went to Japan. We advertised it in Autosport and it sold instantly
Wow.
to Japan. And Roger set about building my touring car because you basically got a motorsport shell and you built the shell. And then with us, we bought a kind of kit of suspension bits from Andy Rouse.
Right.
As everything's different to a road car, it's nothing the same. There was a problem with engines because these RS 500s were in the early development stages, and I mean, an engine then was 15 grand, which would be probably 40 grand today in
Grand.
equivalent money, and they used to blow up all the time. But Rouse could build an engine that held together, but it didn't make a lot of sense having an engine built by someone you were going to race against.
Sure.
But I kind of looked at that and I thought, well, it shouldn't be a problem. I mean, Andy Rouse is so much more experienced than me. I'm never going to be a threat to him. And that's kind of my mindset.
Sure.
So we built this RS 500, as everyone remembers it. And the TV thing was a bit strange, but this is where the commercial opportunity came, because what had happened with the TV was the BBC had agreed to screen it on Grandstand, but they had to be given an edited tape with Murray Walker on the commentary.
Right.
And if it was okay and entertaining, providing they would deliver the tape, they would show it on Grandstand.
Right. Okay.
Now, they decided Steve Ryder was involved, very much involved, and he's always been behind touring cars. And they needed to raise the budget for BHP to film it because BBC wouldn't pay any money at all. They said, no, so they had to raise it commercially. And how they ended up raising it was I gave, I think, 25,000. I think Caliber gave 25,000. And the rest came from the RAC. But by giving that money, I was guaranteed an in-car camera.
Right.
And I knew by having an in-car camera, in 88, there were only 2 in-car cameras. And I knew that no matter how I did, I would get some coverage.
Right.
I spoke to the Equati, Derek at Equati, and said, look, I'm going to do touring cars. It's loads more money. You're going to have to get your hand in your pocket, sort of thing. And I mean, basically, we had £150,000 budget in 88, which actually wasn't enough. But I paid for, the car was 60 grand to build, and you needed about 50 or 60 grand in spare parts as well. A couple of engines, 30 wheels, gearboxes. I mean, it was just every time I went near Silverstone, I was writing checks out. It was like the bottomless pit. But we kind of got there, and I managed to talk Evans Howshaw into coming on board as a small sponsor. I sold them the screen header for 25 grand.
Wow.
Now, Evans Howshaw was the biggest motor group in the UK at the time, and they had 9 RS Ford dealerships. And RS Ford dealerships were the ones that could sell all the RS Cosworths and Escorts and all the. So it was a big deal for them, and they came on board as a sponsor, and we basically went racing, and we went to the first race at Silverstone. We'd done a bit of testing in the car. I think we'd done an engine or two testing because they were a nightmare, those engines, those early ones. Anyway, we got to Silverstone and went out in qualifying, and well, we qualified second behind.
Crikey.
There
Wow.
were a lot of people, champions behind me, Harvey, Hodgetts, quite a few of them. And it was a surprise to everyone, including me, and it was a great story for the BBC because I'd only been racing a year, and it's kind of the guys come from nowhere sort of thing. So
and obviously, as it was their first kind of broadcast of it as well, it was a selling point, I guess, wasn't it? It was a.
It was. I mean, I'm going to go into this in a minute because it's hard to realise the impact it was now. But anyway, the race started. Andy went off like a fucking rocket ship. I mean, he must have hung 6,000 revs on that car and just dropped the clutch.
Jeez.
But I kind of got Andy's mindset of, not at the time, but a few years later. Now, Andy Rouse was certainly one of the best drivers out there.
Yeah.
I mean, as it turned out, Tim Harvey did go on to beat him. So did Rob and, various other people. I never beat him. But Rouse, because he'd had a kind of taste of this TV stardom, he wanted, I didn't realize this till about 10 years later, he wanted to annihilate the opposition.
Right.
And the worst thing I ever did was win that first race because he kind of, I think, felt I stole it from him, But the fact of the matter is, when he dropped the clutch, his engine kind of torque reacted, and he ended up pulling one of the intercooler pipes off his turbo. We didn't know that till afterwards.
Right.
And of course, he lost all boost.
Yeah, it was on like the second lap, wasn't it? His boost went, or the second or third lap.
Completely. I mean, literally on the second lap, as we came out of Cops, I was behind him, and suddenly I went past him, and Graham Good went past him, who was immediately behind me.
What did you think? What did you think when he stopped? I've always wondered that.
When he slowed down?
Jesus.
No, I was so sorry. I really was sorry.
Heartbroken, I can tell.
I was heartbroken, yeah. I mean, I couldn't. If I could have stopped and given him some flowers, I would have done,
Of course.
But
he wouldn't.
At the end of the day, that's what it was. I wasn't out of the woods yet. I mean, I had Graham Good crawling all over me, who was a really experienced driver and been around for a lot of years and definitely wasn't taking any prisoners. And I think second or third lap, I went slightly wide at Maggots and he got up the inside of me, and then we were nose to tail down the straight. And then I tried to go round the outside of him at the bottom. I mean, I can't believe that I'd already fucking wrecked a Sierra there the year before by trying to do the same. Anyway, Graham Good, I think, was running too much boost on his engines, and he lasted another couple of laps and he was out, and I was well clear by then.
You're off.
And I just kind of stroked it to the end. Andy Rouse came back, charging back, but I kind of waved him past because I was about 6 laps ahead of him, so I knew he was never going to win. And it was fantastic, when I won that race. And when it appeared on the TV, and it didn't go out on Grandstand first, they showed it twice. And they showed it first on a program called Sport on Friday, which went out on a Friday afternoon, and not many people watched it because they were at work. But the response it got was just phenomenal, because what people don't realize now, everything's televised. Yeah. There's 300 channels and every bit of motorsport's televised, and you can tune into this and tune into that, and everyone's on Love Island and all this type of thing, and reality. But
you've
in
got
those,
800 channels.
yeah, in those days there were 4 channels. Satellite was kind of in its infancy, and no one had it because it was 20 grand or something to have it, you know. And they showed Formula One for like an hour and a half on a Sunday night, if they felt like it, on BBC Two. And when these touring car races appeared, it completely fired the public because it was Sierras, and it just went stratospheric. And if you were lucky enough to get coverage, I mean, it was like being a pop star. It was, and it really was that good. You speak to Rob or any of the drivers who were kind of featured, and you almost got mobbed. I mean, it was fantastic. And then suddenly people realised who you were, and I could start misbehaving without getting in trouble and things like that because they all knew
you kind of became Mike Smith.
Yeah. So,
I mean, just at that time, as I said at the start, you won that first race. That was the first ever BTCC race that I was aware of for that reason, for the TV, and because it just exploded.
Yeah.
It was the first time that
it really did. But one of the problems we had with touring cars is you had the die-hard race fans who understood how racing worked, but a lot of people started tuning into it who weren't racing people, but they liked to see the cars races. And they didn't understand the class system. They didn't understand that you had 12 Sierras racing at the front, yet the little guy at the back with a Toyota was leading the championship because there were only 3 people in his class. And that became a big issue in '89, that they had to get rid of this class system. Because, you know, I don't want to take it away from anyone that won a championship in the class, but no one's fucking interested. You know, the races at the front, we're spending, I don't know, in '89, we were spending 200 or 300 grand running these cars.
Jeez.
You know, and we would spend more on a race than someone with a little Corolla for the whole season. And the public didn't get it. They didn't understand. And I mean, I think in '88, I finished 5th in the overall championship, but I was actually second because House was first in Class A and I was second. And that's
Andy had finished 3rd, hadn't he? And Frank had won it, and I forget who was second.
Yeah.
I forget who was second.
I mean, one of the things, and a lot of people maybe won't agree with this, but in '89, I mean, John Cleland, fantastic driver. He has achieved massive amounts and done loads in his career and was a real character in the series. But in '89, he won a championship in an Astra, and it was a joke because there was no one else in his car. And if there weren't 4 people in the class, Vauxhall put another 2 cars out
just to bulk it out.
And in the last race, he protected, and it did. I don't think it did him any good, but he completely unwound that because, of course, he went on and became a great driver. And John always had talent, but I don't think his greatest moment was, you know, the '89 title.
No, sure. I mean, I actually spoke with John, and he said, "Well, I won it in." Yeah. I forget when it was that he won it. He said, "Oh well, like, it was '95, was it? I can't remember." And he said, "Oh well, I won it, and I've kind of won it before that, but not really." And he's a bit on the
John got it. Yeah. No, I mean, and John doesn't certainly need. I'm not criticising him at all because he was doing it for Vauxhall. It was a commercial decision to promote Vauxhall, but they had a massive problem with the TV audience with the class system, so that's why it changed, and that's really what happened. But the other story about that first win was a personal one. Is that, of course, I won the race. Well, you can imagine the celebrations afterwards. I mean,
just a half a shandy.
Yeah, you can say that again. And you know, I had quite a lot of friends up there, and we all got in it. I was in the BRDC with Jerry Marshall and a few of the others, and they were kind of well done. And I mean, it's completely unexpected by everyone, including me, to win that race. But, you know, somebody said to me, well, it was only a lucky win. But I used to say to people, well, hang on, yeah, there was a bit of luck, but I did qualify second. It's not like I qualified eighth and everyone fell out.
Yeah.
You know, I was second, and yeah, I won the race.
Yeah, you want it fair and fair. You know,
But I mean, the postscript to that whole day was, I'd obviously had a skinful, and I left Silverstone at about 11:30 at night to drive home to Hook, and I had a Ferrari 328 GTS then, which is another story I'm going to come to in a second. And I'm driving down the A34, trying to drive 50, 60 miles an hour, not doing anything. And the phone goes in the car, and it's Kim, my wife. And she said, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm just coming down to the M4, the A34. I'd spoken to her earlier because I'd won the race. She couldn't come to the race because she was 9 months pregnant. And her phone call to me in the car was to say, I'm going into labour. I think I'm going into labour with our second child. And I said, well, look, I can't, you know, I've been drinking, Kim. I can't get my foot down. You're just going to have to sit tight. Anyway, I went home, changed cars, loaded her into the other car, took her down to the hospital. And my son was born at 1:30 that night, you know, and I was sitting in this. Oh, fantastic. I was sitting in this hospital, which was wound up to about 26 degrees in there, with the world's worst hangover, you know, with, but I mean, what a dream, you know, to win the race and have your son born and everything else.
Amazing. Wow. Wow.
I mean, the March 88 was great to me because not only did I win that race, my son was born. I won a race in production saloons because I did 88 in production saloons, trucks and touring cars. And I won one of the truck races at the Truck Grand Prix at Brands Hatch. So I had sort of 3 wins that first month.
That's quite a month. What a start.
Yeah.
What a start to the year.
But we had a reasonably good run in touring cars. The second race was at Alton Park, and that was the race. Oh Jesus, that was a nightmare because we all started on slicks. I think I qualified second or third behind Andy again, and we got 2 laps into the race, and it started to rain, and we're out in these fucking lunatic RS 500s that, you know, on slick tyres at Alton Park. And that's the old Alton Park before they slowed it down, you know.
With the shell hairpin and all the,
Yeah, we did the shell hairpin, but where you came up over the top, we had Nicker Brook was a fast right-hander.
The fast right,
changed it after Paul Warwick was killed.
Yes, sadly, 92, yeah.
Yeah, but we're all out in on slicks, and Andy got away like he always did, like a scalded cat. I'd completely fucked up the start, and I dropped to about 6th or 7th, and had a couple of the BMWs had whipped ahead of me. But I managed in a couple of laps to get back up to second place. But my skating around on these slick tires, and my turbo heat shield, some heat shield fell off, and where the turbo got so hot, it burnt one of the intercooler pipes.
Oh, right.
So I lost all my boost. So I went in the pits, and Dowson and the crew opened the bonnet, and they just said, no, the turbo pipe's gone. So I went out. I just went out again with a normally aspirated RS 500 with about 160 horsepower, they reckoned I had. But luckily for me, I was still in 3rd place. And luckily for Alan Minshaw, that was when him and Sittner came together.
Oh,
Minshaw ended up upside down in the lake, and they stopped the race.
Yes, right.
Yeah, so
that was the one that absolutely wasn't Frank's fault.
No, I don't think it was Frank's fault. No,
certainly not. Never was.
No. And he actually still ended up winning his class because they took the results from the
On
lap
countback.
report. Yeah, so on
Right.
countback. That's it.
Wow. Just while we're Bradley Gravitt is in. Evening, Brad. He's just said hello.
Oh, he's gone to Donington tonight.
Yes, he was Donington bound. He's missed the start,
Yeah.
but he's with us. Just want to say while we're on the subject, good luck this
Yeah.
weekend, Brad. Accelerate Motorsport
absolutely.
in the minis. First full season with the team. So all the best for
Yeah.
Sunday. We will be watching.
Yeah, he's a youngster I talk to all the time because I've known him, well, since he was born. He spent his first 3 Christmases. He may not know this, but at our house actually,
There you
because
go.
we always have the Gravitts around normally at Christmas, and Rob and I would end up irritating the women as usually happened. But Bradley in his early years certainly spent a lot with her, and I'm glad that because he does talk to me about his racing. Although I don't go because I haven't been to a race meeting for years, it's sometimes for him it's helpful to talk to someone other than his father, you know. So,
Sure.
and we're hoping for great things from him this year, you know.
Absolutely.
You know, so he's got his head in the right place. He's certainly a lot more sensible than I ever was at 30. Jesus.
Yeah. And he's in the right team. Yeah, he's
with a
very,
good
very
team
talented.
now. Yeah.
So yeah, good
So
stuff.
Rob at that time hadn't got a drive in touring cars.
Right.
So Mike, who was a good friend of his, was in the BMW. I'd won the race in the first race, and Rob was up there. He came to congratulate me, but he was really upset, and I understandably upset because he wanted to be out there, and obviously he felt if he had been out there, he would have probably won it. I don't know whether he would or he wouldn't, but he did want to be out there. And I felt sorry for him that he, as a friend, he hadn't got a drive in touring cars. But fate always plays a hand in these things. And what actually happened was Peter Hall, who I'd talked about earlier, who was Andy Rouse's partner, had been out in his RS 500 in the Alton Park race.
Right.
And he, like the rest of us, was caught out on the slicks in the wet. And Peter was older and he frightened himself so badly. He just said, Jerry, I'm not going to race this car anymore. He said, and he called us the young lions. He said, you young lions. He said, I just can't get, he said, I could see what was going on out there. He said, and it frightened the life out of me. He said, and I'm not going to race this car anymore. So,
wow.
Armed with that, 2 or 3 weeks later, yet again, I was up at the BRDC watching a race, and Pete Hall was in there with Andy Rouse, and we were just talking. And Pete said, yeah, we're going to try and find someone to go in my car. So I said, well, why don't you put Rob Gravitt? And Andy immediately said, no, we don't want him here, he'll be a pain in the arse. I said, no, he won't. I said, he'll be quick. I said, he'll drive it well. And Andy wasn't very keen, but Pete and I were quite good mates. And I said, look, trust me, put him in, he'll get the job done. And they did a deal. Rob managed to get some, he was quite heavily backed by Shell, and he got some money from Shell, and he got in the car. And, it took him a couple of races to get up to speed, and he knew that running with Andy wasn't going to be the ultimate because everyone knew Andy only gave Andy the power. And
Sure.
but it got him out there. And in fact, by the time we got to the Grand Prix meeting, which was at 88, immediately after the Formula One Grand Prix, that both the McLarens had won, Rob was, I think, qualified second. I'd fucking qualified 10th in the dry or something. I was way back. And Andy was on pole, but Rob had led away. And he'd led just about the first lap of the race, but spun off at the corner just after the bridge. And luckily for me, it was raining because I always went well in the wet because the wet's a great leveler. And if you haven't got the ultimate power, you can really go forward. And
Right.
I had a blinding lap. I qualified 10th. But in the first lap, when Rob fell off, I was second. So I'd managed to go from 10th to second. And one thing I have been pissed off about is that was a fantastic drive with an in-car camera, but it all got edited out and the final cut, not for the BBC, it was on the BBC, but the end of season review, it was all edited out. So that never actually got seen. But Rob, he came back past me. And I tell you what, it was atrocious conditions. There was a lake, a stream going across the track between Beckett's and Chapel. And Rob came past me between Beckett's and Chapel. And I thought, fucking hell, mate, you're going well, but you ain't going to get round Chapel. And sure enough, he got to Chapel, got to this river of water and was off on the grass. And I was kind of watching this sideshow as he was bumping and spinning over the grass. And that was it. I didn't see him after that. But what did happen is Andy had gone. Caliber had 500 guests there. And of course, Guy Edwards drove the second Caliber car. Now, Guy Edwards, I expect most people know, he was ex-Formula One. He was the guy that pulled Niki Lauda out the burning Ferrari at the Nürburgring.
Yeah.
And he got the Queen's Empire Medal for that. So he was an accomplished driver. He was a bit older than most of us. But he was, I think, having a bit of trouble getting up to pace. But at Silverstone, Andy gave him obviously the same level as power as he had in his own car because Caliber had a lot of guests there. And I was running in second and I was on the hangar straight. And I tell you what, Guy Edwards drove past me and I would swear he was going 30 miles an hour quicker than me. I mean, it was like, sorry, have I got another gear here somewhere? It was just, yeah, it was like it had a rocket ship. So that demoted me to third, and on the last lap, I understeered wide at Stowe, and Lawrence got underneath me, Lawrence Bristow, and so I finished fourth. But it was a great race. It was a great race.
But it was all kind of skewed towards the Caliber guys.
Well, no, rightly so. You know, they had their people there, but you know, it's the way it was. I mean, as it turned out, at the end of '88, Roger Dowson and I, when the season finished, and I was quite happy with the season because I'd finished second in Class A. I'd got much. I only won one race, but I was second and third loads of times.
I think it's
I had some great,
wasn't it?
yeah, I had some great races with Mike Newman, Carl Jones, and people like that. Not all of it got showed, but and we had such fun. I mean, Jesus, I was doing madness in that helicopter and stuff. You know, I mean, I've got one of the stories that I forgot to tell you the other day was we had a race at Thruxton, and quite often I had the helicopter in the garden at home, and I only lived about 20 minutes flight from Thruxton. So I'd fired the chopper up quite early in the morning to go to Thruxton, but you have to, I tracked down the M3, then the A303, but you have to go over the high ground at Popham, which is about 500-600 feet above sea level. And this particular morning, 8 in the morning, it was fogged in over Popham. As I approached Popham, it was foggy. Even an idiot like me doesn't fly helicopters in the fog because you end up upside down and dead. And so I thought, shit, what am I going to do? So what I decided to do, anyone that ever used that road, the top of Popham, there are two garages against either side, Little Chef on one side.
Yeah.
So I landed the helicopter in the field by the Little Chef.
I know it well. That Little Chef had a play area in the it with a little dinosaur slide. Yeah.
I had to land it. I couldn't fly in the fog, so I put it down. I got my bag out the back. I went in the little chef and said to the lady, look, if anyone comes in, that's my helicopter. I'll come back for it later. So I thought, well, I'll just go out onto the A303 and get my thumb out. So I've gone out on the A303. I've got this bag with my race suit and stuff in, and I started thumbing a lift. Well, almost immediately, there's a car stop, Ford Sierra. So I've thrown my bag in the back, jumped in, sort of put the belt on. This guy's pulled away. And I said, oh, thanks for stopping and whatever. He said, where are you going? I said, Thruxton. He said, oh, okay. He said, what are you doing right out there? He said, you're in the middle of nowhere here. How have you ended up there? I said, well, I'm a racing driver and I was just flying my helicopter to Thruxton and I had to land it because of the fog. And he's driving, he's going, oh, yeah, I got a right one here, bloody dreamer. I can see,
Yeah.
you know, didn't believe a word of it.
What's this guy on?
Yeah. So we're going down the M3 and he's asking me questions and he said, oh, yeah, what do you race then? I said, one of these, actually. He said, what, a Ford Sierra? I said, yeah, slightly different, but it's one of these. Oh, right. Okay, that's convenient, isn't it? You know, all this sort of stuff going on. So we got down the A303 and we got to the turnoff where Thruxton is. And I said, well, you can drop me here if you like. He said, no, don't worry. He said, I'll take you in. So, because I could see now, this guy thinks I'm a fucking lunatic. You know, I'm just a fairy tale thing. So we've driven down to the circuit. I've only got one ticket. And I've said to the guy, look, oh, he said, Jerry, yeah, that's all right. You can go in. So we've driven in. And in those days, Thruxton didn't have a tunnel. It was a gate across the track.
Yeah.
So we've driven across the gate to the paddock. And this guy said, come out of the car, I'll come and show you my car. So he's come and he's walked round and we showed him the race car. And anyway, 5 minutes later, I said, look, I'll take you back to your car now. I took him back to the car, said thanks and goodbye. I said, he said, yeah. He said, that's great. I said, you didn't believe me when I got in the car, did you? He said, no, I thought you were a dreamer. He said, and that was it. So that was quite a funny story, really.
Oh,
and I
brilliant.
recovered the helicopter later that afternoon.
I just love the thought of this guy saying, I've just picked up a hitchhiker who reckons he's parked his helicopter in the field.
Yeah, complete head case. And actually, I mean, if someone had got in and said that to me, I'd have thought, oh, yeah, right, okay, yeah.
You'd have pulled over and let them back out again, you know.
Yeah. But I mean, at the end of, with the helicopters, on a more serious note, I mean, Mike had bought himself a Robinson helicopter then, and he was using it as I was. And David Richards, who ran ProDrive, he had a Hughes 500. But Mike and Sarah had a really bad helicopter crash in Gloucestershire, I should say, or Worcestershire, at the end of '88, and they were really lucky to get out alive because they came down in some woodlands and they were trapped in the aircraft with fuel all over them, you know, and thank God it didn't catch fire. But anyway, they ended up in a hospital in Cheltenham. And of course, it was completely staked out by the paparazzi. You know, it was really big news because they were kind of the golden couple then. And Rob and I thought we should probably go and see them, you know. I think Sarah was quite badly hurt. Mike had broken his ankle and a couple of other things. But we drove to the hospital and Jesus Christ, there were newspapermen everywhere, you know, cameramen or paparazzi or whatever you call. So it was quite difficult to get in the hospital, but we managed to get in and we did get to see Mike and he wasn't too bad, but we didn't see Sarah. She was more badly hurt, but they recovered from that, which was lucky because Mike always took his flying very seriously. I sort of did, but pretended I didn't. I used to do crazy things, some of which we'll go into later because you know some of the stories. But that was kind of good. And the other thing that was important for me was that at the end of '88, I had a meeting with Dowson and said, look, we've got to sort these engines out. I can't, you know, Andy's not giving me the power. We'd done a development program with Mount Tune through 88 with the touring car engines. Now, Mount Tune built the engines for the Firestone cars, which were the production cars, which I also drove, and they were very reliable. And David Mountain, who ran Mount Tune, wanted to develop a touring car engine because it was a big business if he could get into it. So I said, well, look, you build the engine, we'll put it in and give it a whirl. But he built 2 or 3 engines and they just destroyed themselves within 3 laps because it was the electronics that were difficult, to get on top of in those days. Meanwhile, well, I suppose I'd had decided with Roger Dowson that we ought to go and see Andy up at Coventry. So I went up with Roger to see Andy and sort of had a meeting with him and said, look, I can't do another year with you. I know what's going on. You're not giving me the power. I said, I can't race like this. We tried to buy, I didn't tell Andy this, but I'd also approached Eggenberger to try and get engines from him.
Wow.
But we were giving Andy 15 grand for an engine. I mean, Eggenberger wanted 40 grand for an engine. I mean, that was just, we had money, but I couldn't run to that. That was madness.
And I guess Rudy Eggenberger knows his stuff, but that is,
yeah,
that's a hell of a hike, isn't it?
Well, it was. But you see, the problem was people were building these engines. I mean, Terry Hoyle did a couple for somebody, and they just used to lunch themselves because the electronics, were. Andy was in the UK about the only guy that could get on top of it. But the problem was he had control of it, and I think if you ever talk to Rob or Tim Harvey, they were always controlled, which is why Rob and Mike did the deal with Dick Johnson. It was an inspired decision what they went to, but they knew that, they wouldn't win. Anyway, I went up to see Rouse with Roger Dowson in late in 88. And basically Andy said, well, I'll agree to give you level 1 engines, he called, but you're going to have to pay something towards the development. And he said, I want 15 grand towards. So I wrote a check out for 15 grand, left it with him, which was my contribution towards the development, and should have given me level 2 engines for 88. That was never going to happen. And I didn't find out till 3 years later. And I'll tell you why it wasn't going to happen. When Rouse did that deal with me, he, I'm sure, fully intended to honour it. But in January 89, Lawrence Bristow got the deal with Labatt's.
Ah, right.
And did his deal with Andy. Now, bear in mind, Lawrence became a really close friend of mine. And I found all this out 3 years later. And Lawrence said to Andy, if you're going to run 2 cars for me, I don't want anyone else getting level 1 power. We want level 1 power, but you're not to give it to anyone else. Jerry, Sean Walker, or whoever it was. No one gets it. And that's fine, I understand. But what Andy should have done is pick the phone up and said, look, I can't give you level 1 power. You're going to have your 15 grand back. But he didn't do that.
Just fair, which would be fair enough.
Didn't do that. And that's where he's wrong.
Wow.
I would have understood the commercial decision, but he didn't do that. And we went to Alton Park in 89. And, I'd actually put a lot of effort into 89. I'd lost a couple of stone in weight. I'd actually been to a gym, to lose the weight. I got a bit fitter because the guys had built the new car and they'd lost weight. And I thought, well, I mean, I didn't look like that, like I do now, but I was still a bit heavier than I should have been. So I thought, well, they're working hard to lose the weight. You can't turn up there like Billy Bunter, So I went to the effort, and I really thought 89 was going to be my year. I'd be challenging at the front. But from the first moment we ran at Alton Park, you know, it was we were just so far behind. I mean, we were 2.5, 3 seconds off.
Jeez.
And
And
Andy said, "Oh, well, you're not using enough revs. You can use 8,000 revs." And I went out and I came back in. I said, "No, it's harsh at 8,000. Doesn't feel right at 8." Yeah, 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 I'll be okay. And well, of course, what had happened is an RS 500 engine. When you run them at the level they were running, they blow all the oil out the sump, and the
right.
sump goes into a catch tank, and then it drained back into the sump
Recently, yeah.
because of the sump pressure, just the way they were. And of course, what happened is I was going around using these high revs, and the fucking engine absolutely exploded. There's a picture somewhere of my whole car where a rod came through the side where it ran the big ends, and all the hot oil went on the turbo, and we nearly lost the car. Um,
Jeez.
and of course, then it turned out we got the car back to the pits. The lads had to rebuild it overnight because it was all burnt and the wiring and put a new engine in. They got it done. And during this night work, they, with Rouse's engineer, they said, "Oh, yeah, well, to use 8,000 revs, you're supposed to have a bigger pipe from the catch tank back down to the sump." So the oil wasn't draining back quick
But it
enough.
wasn't right.
Yeah, thanks very much. Well, Alton Park was 3 engines, 45 grand, you know, and it just went from bad to worse then. But one thing that had happened was I was having, by 89, I was having some problems with my business. I'd kind of taken the eye off the ball a bit. The recession was starting in Spain. And what we decided to do, because I always handled the finances for my racing cars, but in the end of 88, I said, "Look, I want to keep the racing separate from my own finances." So we set up another company, and it was Mad Associates Limited. And Mad Associates was Mahony, Aquati, and Dowson. So Mad Associates was going to run the racing team, and Roger's wife was going to account it all. And the way we ran our sponsorship then was we used to invoice the companies every month. Now I had a lot of money for 89. I had over 225,000. Then I got tyres from Pirelli. I had more than enough money to run that car. It was like having £500,000 or more now, you know. So we had a really good budget for testing, and it just didn't happen. I mean, I took my eye off the ball. Roger Dowson saw an opportunity and he took it. And the opportunity was that he said to me halfway through the season, "We're not going to have enough money. We're going to have to sell the car at the end of the year." Sorry? And, I was kind of gone in the head. The racing had turned to shit. And it had done me in. I was having business problems. And that kind of really, I think the way I went into it, racing, although I considered myself quite on the ball business wise, I made a lot of decisions that were bad because I didn't only lose the car at the end of the year. I didn't get any of the spares back, a couple of engines,
All the
gearboxes, 30 wheels and all that. I lost the bloody lot.
wow.
And not only did I lose it, but I was made to be the I was made out to be the villain. It was my fault.
Like it was all down to you, were like the scapegoat for it almost, or you would.
Yeah, and of
You
course, what I hadn't realised is because Dowson was controlling the money, my head was everywhere. I was trying to keep Spain together. The recession had started in the UK, and I was letting them run the car. But of course, because they were in control of the finances, um, that they kind of got lower spec engines, if that makes sense, because they lasted longer. I
Right.
only found out all this over the 10 years afterwards, speaking to
Right.
some of
This
the
is all
mechanics.
retrospective
I didn't
knowledge.
know at the time. This has all come together. And I don't want to come across as the sort of bitter and twisted racing driver, because really I'm not. I
No,
really had some great
that's very
times.
clear. That's yeah.
Yeah, great times when I was racing. I don't regret any of it. But I think I made the nest of vipers that I got involved in, and I think in certain areas I had my
Sure.
trousers taken down. And of course, with all these things, you know, I got massive coverage in '88. I just can't. I mean, even Ford, that when that race went out on Sport on Friday, the very first race, they'd done a piece with me pulling up in my Ferrari and getting out and going to the truck and looking at the race cars. They sometimes do. Ford rang me up and said, "Yeah, don't like the Ferrari. We'll lend you an RS 500 road car. You better go and pick it up at Twickenham." I said, "All right, okay." And not only that, I got five. If you won a race then for Ford, you got £5,000, which was quite a lot of money, but wasn't representative of what it cost to run a race. But it was still quite a lot of money then. So I went to Twickenham and I picked up this RS 500 road car, black one, and well, I launched the engine in that in about 2 months, and Mount Tune built me a really hot road engine. Fantastic car. And in fact, when Ford wanted it back, I ended up buying it off them because I liked it so much.
Wow. Fantastic.
So, yeah, I mean, 1889 was sort of pretty much, I was out of contention in that car. I mean, I was winning races in still the prod saloons and things. And the last race I did in the truck was, I think, the beginning of '89, because some fucking lunatic thought it'd be a good idea to put Eddie the Eagle in a truck. Have you heard of Eddie the Eagle?
The skier, yeah, that could only go well.
Yeah, I mean, it was nonsense. I mean, we were at Brand.
It was bad enough putting him on skis.
Yeah, I mean, he was a sort of lunatic, and I mean,
skiing off the shed, wasn't he, and things like that.
Yeah, I was always quite a keen skier, had been since I was a child. I used to go skiing 3 or 4 times a year. You know, after his episode at the Olympics, I mean, we were the kind of laughing stock, the British on the slopes, you know, and the British never actually took to skiing till the 90s. I mean, you used to go skiing when I was a child in the 60s and later in the 70s. You never saw English people there. They all thought you were mad if you went skiing. Of course, now it's very popular. But at this particular truck race, I was on the front row. I think I was on pole, actually. And the truck racing, there wasn't any form of licensing. It was basically they could give you a license to race, the Truck Racing Association or something. It wasn't like the RAC racing license. So they just gave him a license and they tried to put him in for publicity. But in this particular race, we'd started the race and going up to Paddock Hill Bend for the first lap, this fucking truck had come past me and it must have been doing 40. I was on the brakes for Paddock. It came past me 40 miles an hour quicker and it's gone off into the Armco. I've gone round Paddock, but what's actually happened is they come back on the truck, taken out 200 metres of Armco and taken out 5 other trucks. And as I've gone round Druids and come back down to Graham Hill Bend, I've looked across and there's absolute carnage gone on. And those lorries, trucks, tractor units, they were heavy. And there was a lot of concern at the time that a wheel or something would come off one and go in the crowd. I mean, Silverstone actually stopped them racing there for a period because there was a big worry, and I was worried. And you know, I kind of walked. That was another mistake I made. I walked away from truck racing, and I should never have done that because that was just getting big, and I was really highly thought of in that because done very well in it, and I could have probably had a career in that, but I was kind of, it was, I don't know, I didn't really take it that seriously. It was fun, don't get me wrong, but it was massive in Europe, you see. It was never that big in, but Slim Ballgood and Steve Parrish and people like that, they had a fortune out of it. And I should have stayed in it because, of course, my touring car career. How are we doing on time? Because I seem to be just gassing on.
That's great. We're up to. That's right. Oh, okay.
We're all right. Are we still getting comments, or has everyone gone to sleep now?
That's all fine. No, we'll still see a few coming in.
We have
It's all
some
good.
more run. I need some more ice in this.
It's all good. But yeah, I mean, obviously, yeah, that was as you say, that was a time where the truck sort of really kicked off, wasn't it? I remember Steve Parrish and Slim Ballgood doing it. And
yeah, Steve was good.
Yeah,
he was. He's a lot of fun. He raced a Metro, I think. I was kind of involved with.
He's raced everything, isn't he?
Yeah, he had to go in the Celebrity Metro Turbo or something that Dowson ran. I had a race in a couple of times. Funny little buzz box.
Yeah.
So that's kind of 89. There was some grief with the Firestone cars and Ford where I won't even go into that because they wanted a Sapphire to win, and Tim Harvey and we did the 89 Will Hire together. Firestone put 2 cars in. I always partnered Mark Hales, but we'd also recruited Tim Harvey and Slim Ballgood to drive the second car. But I'd done the Will Hire twice, and I'd been second and third, and I wanted to win it, you know. And the Sapphire Cosworth, which first came out, Dowson ran one for Firestone, and it was unreliable and untested. And I said to Mark, I said, look, I don't want to run in the Sapphire in the Will Hire. And he said, why not? I said, because I don't think you'll get to the end. He said, well, you're my teammate. And I said, well, yeah, but why can't we run in the hatch? And he just, you know, he said, no, you know, got to run in the Sapphire because it's the newest car and it's part of the deal. So anyway, we agreed that I would run with Tim Harvey in the hatch and Mark would run with Slim Ballgood in the Sapphire. We were kind of jumping in and out the cars through qualifying, and I think I was on pole, but Mark had set the time. He'd gone fractionally quicker in me. But at the start of the race, basically I fucked off. And within an hour, I had nearly a lap's lead. It's quite a good film of it on YouTube, actually.
Yeah,
the Will Hire 25-hour race, 1989. Anyway, that we got called in after a lap because apparently we were leaking fuel, but we weren't. You know, and they were scurrying around, and the whole thing was political because Ford and Firestone wanted the Sapphire to win, and Tim and I got in the lead 3 times, and we were kind of pulled back. Anyway, not a nice story. More politics, unfortunately.
Kind of rigging it for their own, for their own means. These things go on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're kind of up to.
I mean, by my reckoning, we were up to sort of 90. I mean, up to 90. I mean, you basically moved to BMW, didn't you?
Yeah.
For 90, which didn't kind of work out at all.
No,
he did it.
You know, the problem is I could talk for hours about it here, but because of the class system, the RAC set up a touring car committee. And that was basically 4 manufacturers, David Richards, Jonathan Ashman, who was from the RAC, and I was on it representing the Sierra RS500 owners, if you like, because we all had fortunes invested in these Sierras. And you see what Vauxhall, BMW, and Volkswagen, I think, they wanted the RS500 outlawed.
Right.
And they proposed, and I have to say Andy Rouse was behind it, because he wanted a works deal. He wanted a manufacturer deal,
Right.
even though now he admits it was the wrong way to go and has tried to introduce a couple of times a V8 formula over here. But they basically wanted us. I understood the single class because the public didn't understand these 4 classes.
Yeah.
But
Simplified it.
what they were proposing was a car with like 250 horsepower. And my argument was that a touring car should be 400 horsepower twice, 400 horsepower minimum. I mean, Christ, my production saloon was 300 horsepower, and they were proposing, that the new 2-litre formula would be, only 250 horsepower, the top class, the Formula One of saloon car racing. And I said they'd be too slow. And in fact, what Steve Ryder said, because he was involved, he said, look, Jerry, the public won't see that the cars are going slower if they're closer, if they're all tripping over each other. I said, yeah, but they won't be spectacular. They won't be spitting flames and lighting the rear tyres up. I mean, those RS 500s were bucking Broncos. They were absolutely, you were kind of a passenger in them. They were either on or off. You put your foot down, you either had everything or nothing. There was no mid station because the electronics were in the infancy and they were really difficult to drive. I mean, I didn't know any better, but some of the Grand Prix drivers got in them and things, and they were really difficult to drive to get on top of.
Sure.
Because they were so spectacular. But they wanted to lose all that, and I wasn't happy with that. But I got shouted down, and I could see they needed to do so. What I said to BMW is, I said, if you put a turbo on the M3, I said, you'll beat everything, because the M3 was such a great chassis. The Group A M3, when I eventually got it, it was like the best balanced thing I've ever driven, compared to a Sierra. But anyway, we ended up with this 2-litre formula. I'd lost basically all my investment I'd lost the Sierra and all the parts, and we've covered that. And I decided, well, I'll go racing, but I'm not going to own a racing car and all the bits anymore. I had a good budget to run a car, but I didn't want to own a car.
Someone else can buy it in, yeah.
Well, quite frankly, I didn't have the money either. I had good sponsors, but I didn't, I didn't want to lose another 150 grand, and I didn't have it to lose. So I talked to Vic Lee. Now, Vic Lee had been around since I started racing. He used to race a Golf in production saloons, and I think he raced various things in touring cars. But we got to know Vic in '87, and he was a nice enough guy. He was good fun. He was part of the social thing that used to go on with us all. And Vic had said to me that he was going to he wanted to run an M3 in the new formula, and he was going to go to Bugatti to buy one. He was going to buy an ex-Bugatti car. So at the end of '89, he said, look, why don't you come to Imola with me? I've been invited for the last round of, must have been the European Touring Car Championship at Imola by Bugatti. We'll be their guests, and then we're going to go to their workshop. He said, I'm going to try and buy one of their cars off them. So I said, okay, great. Yeah, I'll come. And we flew down to, I don't know whether it was Milan or Turin, and hired an Alfa Romeo from Hertz. I managed to wreck 4 of those in a week, 4 Alfa Romeos, because if you're a racing driver, you had to wreck hire cars. That was all part of it. And so we turned up at Imola, and Jesus, Bugatti, what a setup. Let me tell you, how's this for a star lineup? They had Steve Soper, Johnny Cicotto, who was an ex-motorcycle champion, Jack Lafitte, and Jarno Morbidelli, I think it was.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Young
who,
Gianni Morbidelli. Wow.
yeah, he nearly got Jason's drive
Yes.
for Williams. You know that story.
Yes. Yes.
And so, I mean, Jack Lafitte was ex Grand Prix driver.
Ligier and
Steve Soper was a legend.
he's
You know,
Steve
I
Soper,
mean,
yeah.
I got to know him socially over the years, but when I was racing against him, well, I never raced against him because he was always much quicker than me. But I did get to know him afterwards and subsequently up until I got locked up. But to me, Steve Soper, a fucking legend because
Yeah.
now, and I watch all the racing. I mean, Christ, he's 71. He gets in these cars at Goodwood and things, and he drives them like he's still in his 20s
Yeah.
against guys who are in their 20s and things, you know, or
Yeah.
whoever these guys that race touring cars now. And he's amongst it. And to me, I mean, Steve, I was there in 92. I was in the BRDC when that last round, you know, the crash with Soper and
Clement and
Cleller.
Harvey, yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was right there when it happened. But, you know, a lot is made in that race about the crash. And of course, the crash was controversial, shall we say. But
Just a touch.
what people forget is that Steve was taken off. The back of his car was completely rearranged, probably all the suspension out and settings, and he was last. And he drove like a fucking demon and
Yeah.
caught up that, you know, that gun, you know, the bunch of Harvey and Hoy,
Yeah.
and we've got to talk about Will before I go off as well,
Oh,
because
we definitely will.
yeah,
Yeah.
we all loved Will. And you know, I mean, he's just such a, you know, an amazing driver. And when he had those races with Rouse in at Brands Hatch, I mean,
88.
Eggenberger built basically endurance cars.
Yeah.
So they were usually racing for 2 or 3 hours. Was Andy built sprint cars. And if you saw the cars on track, Andy's cars were always set up like skateboards. They were stiff, very stiff, whereas the Eggenberger chassis was very compliant. But Andy always had more power, and you could see in those races, the famous race, Soper and Rouse at Brands.
Yeah.
I mean, I was in that, but I was much further back.
I think everyone was. Yeah.
Yeah, but you can see Andy is actually outpowered Steve, but Steve Carr is a lot more compliant than Andy's car, you know, and I think that was good. But of course, Andy did beat them in the 88 TT, and I would say that was Andy's probably career best win because he beat the best in the world.
Yeah,
in the 88 TT. I think we finished 16th, but I was happy to finish.
Yeah,
that's when Dick Johnson came over and went sort of 5 seconds quicker than everyone else. You know?
Blew everyone out the water, yeah.
Oh, he was a character, that boy.
Yeah.
I went and talked to him in the garage, and he was.
Going.
Yeah, he must be. I mean,
he's still
this
going.
is the problem now. You see, all these guys. I mean, myself, Rob, even Tim Harvey's even younger than us, but we're the youngest because a lot of them are a lot older. You know, Mike Newman, Graham Good, Andy Rouse. You know, they're all getting old, so these stories are going to die with, you know, these guys. You know, so
hopefully not. We're going to keep them alive. We've got to talk about them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you need to get a few of them. I mean, Andy's he's a very introvert person.
He is, yes. I've had a couple of words, but he's not.
Yeah, I bumped into him in a garden centre. Jesus, that must have been 15, 20 years ago. And he didn't know I was in there in Windlesham, and I'd spotted him because he lives in Sunningdale now. And I saw where he was, and I went behind a shelving which had compost or something in it, and I just sort of got my mouth close to the compost and said through the shelving, "Rouse, you're a fucking cheat." And, and he went, what? Who's that? Who's that? Of course, I was only messing about, but
Yeah.
I hadn't seen him for years, but
Oh, brilliant.
still the same. Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Oh, love that. Love it.
But anyway, we went to Imola, and I watched these Bugats, and tremendously social people, the Italians. And we saw the race, very impressive setup. I can't remember who did what in the race, but I can't imagine they didn't do well. And we were invited back to their headquarters, and we had an address, and it was a place in San Gimignano, I think it's called, which is a very famous tourist town in Tuscany. And it's like a walled town, an old ancient walled town. But all the Americans go there because it's a place to go in Tuscany. But we had this address, and Vic and I are in the third Alpha. I think I'd wrecked. I pulled the door off one of them, put the conrod through on another one, because that, unless you wrecked hire cars, you weren't part of the club, sort of thing.
Sure.
So, and the other thing we did, I got out, and I mean, this is schoolboy stuff, but it was hilarious. I got out the car and I turned the windscreen washers towards the pavement. So as we went past people on mopeds and scooters, which there's a lot of in Milan or Turin or wherever it was, no, it must be Milan, I'd put the washers on, it would squirt people, and they go mad. The Italian people, they're a bit like the Spanish. They're very sort of macho, and don't you dare laugh at me. But anyway, we got this address, and we'd driven out on the Monday to this San Gimignano place. No sat navs, we just had a map, but we had this address, and we're driving sort of on the outside of this wall, and we had this address, and I couldn't speak Italian, but we stopped and asked somebody, and they said, yeah, there. So we're looking at this like little service station, which is got two old pumps, a tumble down shed, and it's got sort of chickens running around on the forecourt. So we pulled on the forecourt, and this little old lady's come out with a headscarf on, sort of waddling along. And I said, this can't be fucking Bugatti. I said, this is like Shantytown in the 1920s. So we showed this woman this address. See. And she's pointed sort of over the back. And there was like a cliff at the back of this garage. So we walked to the cliff, looked down, and there's this beautiful, industrial unit with great big factory. And of course, they were down. But the original garage was this little sort of tumbled down place.
Derelict old
This
thing.
woman was sort of Signora Mama Bugatti, who was serving the fuel, with the chicken. Anyway, we had a wonderful 4 days there. We were looked after. I can't remember the guy's name, but what I do remember, his real business was he made masts for sailing boats.
Right.
And if Steve's watching this tonight, he'll know the guy's name instantly. I can't remember his name, but he made masts for sailing boats, but he was kind of the money behind the Bugatti team. And Vic agreed a deal to buy one of the cars. And then on the flight back, I said, well, where are you going to get the money from? Oh, he said, well, don't worry, I'll do it. But I actually went back to the UK, and I spoke to him a couple of times. I thought, well, he's not going to get this together. And I had a budget, but I didn't want to end up at the start of the season with no car, sort of thing. And I wasn't convinced Vic could get the deal together. So I decided to run with Roy Kennedy, who ran a company called BRR Racing, and they were based at Silverstone. But Roy wasn't an engineer. He was a kind of motor trader retired who earned a living out of running race cars, and it was a really bad decision. John Llewellyn had run the car in Group A form in '88, and it had been one of the BMWs that went round. You know, I don't think he had particular drive, but I got to test that M3, I think in January at Silverstone, in original Group A format. And I drove it, and it was so fantastic. I mean,
Really?
the chassis was so well balanced, and I was out in the wet, and I could just, because I was used to the Beast, the RS 500 Beast, I could wring the neck of this thing, you know, and I just kept my foot in it, you know, in the wet, and sort of, it was just such a fantastic car. But that's not how we raced it. It then had to be converted to 2 litre spec, which was Jesus. I mean, they built these engines. I got factory engine, which I was happy about. But we tested this engine, and it was, I'm sort of, is that it? I couldn't believe how slow it was. I mean, that this was a 2 litre formula, what they were proposing. And my production saloon was actually faster. It was a faster car. Well, it wasn't, because it didn't go round corners. Otherwise, it was faster. And then ProDrive developed this 6-speed gearbox, because a Group A M3 had a 5-speed with a clutch and everything. And ProDrive developed a 6-speed dog box, which basically you put your foot down, you didn't lift. So you went through the gears, bang, 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 and you just didn't lift off. So we were testing at Silverstone and in the morning, and they brought this gearbox over, and they said, look, you've got to try this gearbox, 6-speed dog box, you don't lift. And it was about 18 grand, this gearbox. So I said, okay, we'll give it a whirl. And the lads put it in during the lunch break. They swapped them over. And I went out in the afternoon and went a second quicker just with this gearbox, because you literally, I mean, you had to be a gorilla to use it. Because now the touring cars, when you pull the gear lever, it cuts the engine with all the, then it didn't. You put your foot down and you just crash it through the gears, and it really was fast because you're not clutching or anything.
Yeah.
So I bought one of those. I had to buy various other things to up spec this car to 2 litre spec, but I finished one race out of 6, and that was kind of last. And I walked away from it. I just had enough, really.
No,
It
sure.
was the finish of it.
Yeah, I guess by that point it had almost run its course, and obviously,
my head had gone. The business was struggling, and you know, I mean, I didn't have a nervous breakdown. I'm much made of tougher stuff than that, but you know, I kind of walked away from touring cars. I just gave it up. It was a bad lot, really. But you know, I had such good times, and I wasn't out of the touring car set. I wasn't driving, but socially I was still very much involved, you know, and helicoptering and all that sort of thing. That was kicking off, the helicopter.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I mean, excuse me. I mean, I'm just keeping an eye on the clock and everything, but we're absolutely fine. I mean, that's what you come to the racing with the touring car. You're still doing bits of saloon car racing, things like that. But we've mentioned you've got a load of, I mean, some incredible, some absolute rippers of stories. I mean, some hilarious ones that we've been through. I mean, but just before we get to those, I mean, we have to, I guess, sort of take the mood down a bit. I mean, because there were, you lost some money with the business, and then you'd got back into like the hospitality side, but that eventually proved to be like a downfall almost of yours, didn't it?
You're a bit previous on that. The hospitality business didn't come around till
a bit later,
the end of the 90s. But I kind of moved from touring cars. I moved back into cars, but helicopter charter. I had a helicopter charter company, and I did a lot of work. I did work for the BBC, but principally I did a lot of work for McLaren. And I think I flew for McLaren for about 3 years. and certainly at the time of the European Grand Prix, we were doing their movements, and a couple of Silverstones as well. So I was doing quite a lot of work with the helicopters, and that's kind of filled in the mid 90s. And the McLaren thing was very enlightening because Ayrton Senna and Gerhard Berger were driving for them then. And in those days, when Ron was running the company, and I have issues with the fact he got thrown out the company he founded.
Yeah.
I actually don't know how he ever got his head around that, but that's something else. But anyway, in those days, Ron used to take over a hotel called the Manoir de Quatre Saisons, which is Raymond Blanc's hotel at Great Milton, which is near Oxford. And it's probably one of the best hotels I've ever stayed in the world. And I've stayed in a few over my life, but that's one of the best. And we used to base the helicopter there along with the tag helicopter and then fly McLaren's guests and drivers in to the Grand Prix. It's the first time contact on a personal level with Ayrton Senna and Gerhard Berger. And I was sitting in the lounge having a drink, and a very civilized drink. It wasn't a Jerry Mahony drink. It was a it was a Ron Dennis drink, and a Ron Dennis drink is being a bit more proper. Probably how I'd have to behave with my father, God bless him, when he was around. And I know Gerhard came in, and I think if you talk to anyone who was in the know in Formula One, they'll say that it was Gerhard who got Ayrton to kind of lighten up. You know, Ayrton was a bit too serious with everything, didn't have fun. Now, Gerhard Berger, I can tell you, definitely was madder than I have ever been. He is, and you never played a trick on him, because if you play, get you back 10 times worse. And he was a real gangster and a real, dare I say it, ladies' man as well. He was a poon hound. I think that's what they used to be called. But I mean, there were many funny instances with them. I mean, I have to say, Ayrton was always, I didn't come across him that much, but he was always around when I was flying and whatever. But he was more quiet and reserved. I remember having a conversation with him after qualifying at the European Grand Prix at Donington, because we were flying them out of Donington. They were staying at a place called Stapleford Park, which is a hotel at Melton Mowbray, and he qualified quite badly. And I think he was 10th. Well, he's quite a long way down the field, and it's often cited as one of his best drives that he came up to first in a couple of laps. But I spoke to him after that race, and he was not that happy. But of course, he went on and had that fantastic drive. And of course, that leads to one of my stories, the Andretti story, because we need to lighten it up a little bit. And we had 2 helicopters running. We had my Jet Ranger, actually 3, because the tag helicopter was there, which was Mansoir Auger's helicopter. And then we had my Jet Ranger, and I used to wet lease a Long Ranger that belonged to the guy that owned Minardi Formula One team, Stoddard. Was it
Paul Stoddard? Yeah,
Paul Stoddard. European Aviation. So I used to use his Long Ranger, and the difference between a Long Ranger and a Jet Ranger seats 5 people, and a Long Ranger looks the same but seats 7. And we used to use that quite a lot. And I was loading. It was a really bad day. It was foggy. It was almost not flyable because it wasn't fog, but it was misty rain. And I was loading the because the helicopter would come back and then land, and then with all the rotors and the noise going, you get the next group of customers in and make sure they're all seated and belted in, and then you take off without turning it off. So it was all very noisy. But this is when Michael Andretti was driving for McLaren. So that would have been 94, I guess.
93.
93. Okay. The European Grand Prix. And that didn't go very well. There was a bit of tension with Michael Andretti, I could tell, with the team, because he was struggling getting to grips with it. But anyway, so it's the Sunday morning before the race and it's pissing with rain, and I'm out there. The long range has landed. I've got basically Mario Andretti, Michael Andretti, and the lady who I assume was Michael's mother. And I've loaded them. Mario's got in the helicopter, Michael's got in, and then this lady has said, "Oh, I'm not getting in that helicopter, Jerry. I only fly in twin engine helicopters." But you've got Mario and Michael sat in there, all strapped in. So I'm trying to say, well, the tag helicopter, which was a twin squirrel, is going to be, another 40 minutes coming back. She said, "Oh, well, I'll wait for that." Anyway, Michael has shouted out at me, "What's going on out there, Jerry?" And I said, "Listen, your mother's going to wait for the tag helicopter in 40 minutes. She doesn't want to fly in this one." And he's looked at me and said, "That ain't my mother. That's my wife." Because he was married at that time to this older woman, which it didn't last. But of course, if anyone could stick their fucking foot in it, it would be me, wouldn't it? You know,
with the Andrettis, yeah.
I just went, "Oh, sorry," shut the door, and they were off and gone. But, Jesus,
Quick escape.
talk about roll up and fall into a ball. She was a pain in the arse, that woman. And I can't even remember her name. He divorced her a couple of years later.
Oh, crikey. Oh, whoops.
It didn't work out.
Whoops.
No. So I did a lot of helicopter work for a few years and was sort of not really involved in touring cars. I got involved with Rob in 97 when he was running the Honda, and we went to Bathurst, and there's a story there, but I don't know. We into the Bathurst story, have we?
I think so. There's nothing wrong with it, is there?
Well, I'm okay with it. Right. So
fine. I mean, yeah.
I always wanted to race at Bathurst, but I never got the opportunity, really. But when Rob was racing with the Honda Accord in 97, I was kind of involved in that. I don't know what you'd call it. I was sort of team advisor or just general pain in the arse. I don't know what you call it. But I was kind of around, and he was sponsored by Rocket Cargo, and I got on really well with his sponsors and whatever. So we decided we're going to go. They're going to do the Bathurst race, and Rob was penciled in to drive with Lee Brooks, because Brooks Motorsport ran the car. So we flew out to Australia, and we stayed in Sydney for 4 days, I think at the A&A Hotel. And I decided it would be a good idea to hire a Harley Davidson and ride that up to Bathurst and sort of have it like pretending to be a roustabout or something up there. Not my most inspired idea. But while we were in the hotel, Alan Gow, who of course everyone's heard of and knows, was also in the same hotel. And he was staying, we were on a landing in this hotel, and he was staying down the landing. Now, I have to say, I'm going to tell this story, but Alan Gow always denies it. But I'm going to tell the story anyway. And
I'm in no place to say anything. I will just let.
No, it's true. And I actually mentioned it to Rob the other day. And but we were in my hotel room, and I was thumbing through the yellow pages as one does, and I'd found this escort agency that, amongst other things, supplied ladyboys. So I said to Rob, I said, come on, let's, I'm going to order up one of these and we'll send it to Gal's room. And I said, that'll be a hoot. We'll see what happens. So I've got on the phone, spoken to this woman, got this lady boy organised for, I don't know, just before dinner. I made sure, sort of like 8 o'clock, so we knew he'd be in his room. So I paid with a card. I thought this would be a nightmare later on if my wife sees the card. But so at the allocated time, Rob and I are kind of camped out on the landing. And sure enough, this lift's open. And this, I tell you what, wasn't bad looking for a man or lady boy. Well, I mean, excuse me, but if you'd had a few drinks, you could have been embarrassed, you know. But we've seen this sort of long-haired, lovely-looking thing that was actually a boy or man go and knock on Gal's door. So we thought this would be funny because, you know, she either won't get in or she'll go in and again get fired out. So anyway, he's opened the door. She's gone inside, and we're waiting, and we're waiting, and we've waited about half an hour, and she never came out the house, out the room. So we're sort of rolling around thinking, well, he's obviously got involved. And so anyway, that's sort of the following morning, we've seen Alan down at breakfast. And I, of course, started the old Mickey taking and said, what about your visitor last night, Alan? Was he okay? Was he? And he said, well, what are you talking about? I said, well, you know, the company we sent to your room. Well, I didn't have any company. Totally denied it. Denied it ever since. Never went to my room, he said. Well, what can I say?
Well,
True
now,
story, but never went to his room.
I
So
see.
that
Well,
was quite amusing.
we'll see.
He'll probably sue me now. Well, that's all right.
Oh dear.
But
Doesn't
maybe
matter. I'm no part of this. It's
maybe it
me.
did go to a different room. I don't know, but
Maybe.
maybe he changed it.
We may never know.
So we had
Oh,
the Bathurst a week there. I rode the Harley up to Bathurst itself, 2.5 hour ride. I could hardly walk when I got off it, but I did my lap of Bathurst on this Harley Davidson, which was quite good.
That's a pretty cool way to see it.
We had a great week. I mean, I say we, I wasn't in the car, but the team, we were in the top 10 shootout. And I don't know, I think we qualified 7th or 8th, which wasn't a bad hit because the Honda Accords were very, very slippery, you know. Can't remember in the race what happened. I think we went out with a drive shaft. There'll be people watching who know what happened, but
yeah, I'll be able to fill it in.
So that was the 90s. And how I got into hospitality. So we're moving on to the stuff now that people really want to hear. And we're getting to the time of the nonsense, of course. But what actually happened was I'd been invited by Ford to a touring car race. And I was trying to think when it was. I think it might have been 97 or 98.
Okay.
And somebody, yeah, it was at Brands Hatch, and they had hospitality there. And I got sent a ticket and invited to go. So I went, and this sort of tent thing that they had the hospitality in was set up on the bank opposite the pits. And I spent the day in there, and I thought, fuck me, this is a bit rubbish. Motor manufacturer. And it was like a tent you'd put up at the village fete, and you know, sort of walking across cork matting, and the food wasn't that great, and it was all, you know, I just thought it was, you know, I'd been invited, so I wasn't rude or anything, but I just thought this ain't great. And I got to speak to, I've forgotten his name now, but the guy who invited me was something on Ford's marketing side. Towards the end of the day, and he said, "Have you had a good day?" I said, "Yeah, great." I said, "Lovely day." I said, "Nice to come along and be able to, you know, have something to eat." I said, "Look, do you mind asking? I said, you've obviously organised this hospitality. I said, what's it cost? And he said, I think he said 350 quid a head plus VAT. And I thought, fucking hell, I added up how many people were in there, how much money it was. And I thought, do you know what? I reckon I could do this better than that. And that's always how I've got involved in any business I've got involved in.
Right.
I've looked at it. I mean, my boat business in Spain, I did because, and I was successful because I looked at it and I thought I could do it better than the people that were doing it. And that's how I set up the VIP club, or the Touring Car Paddock Club, as it was originally called, was because I knew I could do it better. And I ran the first year at a massive loss because I put up a building, and I didn't put up these horrible tents. I put up the Dutch buildings that were like you got an Ascot with proper doors, proper floors. I had a grandstand. I had real luxury loos. And once I turned up at every race, including Knock Hill, with those people, I'd established a brand, if you like, and it kind of took off. And from nothing years, we were definitely the market leaders. I was doing everything in touring cars. A lot of the teams, Lotus came in with a championship, the Elise Championship, and we ran a paddock facility for 200 people. We had a building by the side. I was doing Formula One tests. I mean, it just skyrocketed, but it was on quality. You know, it was all done on quality. I had some experience of catering, but it was all about knowing how to do things properly.
Yeah.
And the first year I lost a fortune, but then from then on, it really took off, and it's a numbers game, hospitality. So they cost a fortune to put up these buildings, and you kind of run at a loss for the first day, you know, but it's a numbers game. You get enough people in there paying money, it's good. And that was very successful. And then we had the Octagon set up, which a lot of people don't know, but the Brands Hatch circuits were originally owned by the Fulston family and run at that time by Nicky Fulston. And the Americans, as the Americans always do, particularly a company called Interpublic in America, decided that we Limeys didn't know how to do racing, and they were going to come over here and do it like they do it in the States. And they bought up all the circuits. They tried to buy Silverstone, and that's another story in itself, because I was involved in all that with the BRDC, and because I was a member by then. They basically bought all the Brands Hatch circuits, Netterton, Cadwell Park. They took an operating lease on Silverstone for the BRDC for 5 years, 5 million a year, with a bond of 5 million or something like that. And from my point of view, I was already doing a lot of Formula One work for test days, and I was doing work for Superbikes, World Superbikes as well. So we were really busy. But Octagon, Interpublic came over, they set up this company, and it was run by a chap called Rob Bain, who was the chief executive. And basically, I did a deal with Rob Bain where it took 18 months to do the deal, but I would become their preferred hospitality operator for all the British circuits, which for me was massive. And I kind of I thought, right, I'm going to get this set up. Business was set up, run it for 5 years, and sell it, and I could retire. So I paid £1 million for the hospitality franchise, and had to borrow a lot of money. And that started off the contract. I've actually still got the contract. It's about this thick, and every time something was written, it had to go to New York to their lawyers and everything else.
Right.
Eventually, we got the deal done, and for me, it was a fantastic deal. And we carried on. We were running more events. I did the Ferrari Festival. I did World Superbikes, touring cars. I ran the race centre with for touring cars at Toka Centre, but I ran everything at a really high level. And but what actually was what the Americans thought was going to happen didn't happen. And in fact, Octagon Motorsports were losing 50 million quid a year. Not through me, my business was great, but the way they were running the circuits, you know, they couldn't get 60,000 people into a race meeting. You just don't get those numbers in the UK. So they were off their numbers. And the first I knew there was a problem was I got called to Brands Hatch, which I thought was for a normal meeting. But when I got to Brands Hatch, I was called up to the boardroom. And there were about 6 or 7 people in there. And there were some lawyers in there. And this Chinese guy who was come over from New York. And he said, we've looked at the terms of, and we want terms. And I said, what do you mean? Well, we're not happy with the deal that's been done. Well, of course, they saw the numbers we were getting in and, you know, the sort of deals we were doing in terms of people and how much money was obviously being earned. And because they were losing money, they wanted to kind of sharpen the pencil. Well, the contract was very clear and it covered all bases. And I said, no. I said, look, it took us 18 months to do this deal. I said, we've only had it running for 6 months. I'm not changing it now. So that was kind of more or less the meeting. It wasn't quite as open and shut as that. But we went then to with touring cars to Mondello Park. We were running the Toka Race Centre and we had a building there for hospitality. And at the end of the race, as we were packing up, this guy came over and said, is your name Jerry Mahony? I said, yes. He said, I've got this for you. And he handed me an envelope. And I opened the envelope and I kind of read it. And I thought, this looks like a termination notice to me. So I got on the phone and got hold of my lawyer, Simon Taylor. He was a good lawyer. And I said, look, I've been given that. He did all the contracts originally. He said, no, it's definitely a termination. He said, they can't do that. I said, well, it's because I wouldn't. He said, listen, in the contract, Jerry, he said, there's a clause that if you and Octagon don't agree about something, there's like a 3-week clearing, you know, cooling off period, then it has to go to arbitration and everything. And so it was covered, but they'd done an illegal termination. And I on Monday, Simon Taylor sent a fax to Octagon or Rob Bain and said, look, you've done an illegal termination. We're going to take you to court. And there was no doubt we would win a court case. And that's what happened. We started legal proceedings. But the killer for me that I didn't see coming is because I started legal proceedings, I was banned from all the circuits.
Ah, right.
But what they Silverstone, because I was, and that caused
so couldn't touch you.
But they got round that because they had the commercial rights to Silverstone and got round that. So while the legal thing was going on, I wasn't earning any money. And because I'd kept all my eggs in one basket, you know, I couldn't do anything. But we had a cast iron case. You know, we were happy. Let's go to court. You know, we'll win the case. But of course, what happened, we then found out that Octagon was losing considerable amount of money,
Right.
and they then unloaded the circuits and kind of sold out and didn't have any assets left. And basically, I got nothing, and I was left with massive debts
Yeah.
that I couldn't really service.
So you basically won the case, but you got nothing for it, essentially.
Yeah, it was all. It was just
Just a
your
mess.
worst nightmare, really, and you know, I couldn't deal with. I managed to deal with the legal fees. The legal fees in any court case, you're dealing with decent lawyers, even 20 years ago, it was a fortune. But
Yeah.
I had a big problem with my bank because I still owed them a lot of money, and I just tried to get them to hang on. I said, look, Octagon are selling the circuits. They've lost millions. They're scuttling off back to America. Somebody else is going to buy the circuits. I can start operating again. Just give me to the start of the season. And Lloyd's couldn't see, they're fucking idiots, these bank people. They don't understand that. What's the season? Well, if you can do it then, start earlier. No, you don't understand. In racing, the season, so my
They
income.
have to be racing to be present at, yeah. They
I've
didn't get it.
people who would have still used me, team dynamics, and I could have started in a small way again and built it up. There was no problem that side. But
Yeah.
the bank wouldn't wait. I had massive pressure. I had 3 kids in private school. I wasn't living above my means. I was living to my income at the time, but
Yeah.
the income stopped. And, here we come. I got the opportunity to get involved in something, and stupidly I got involved. Now I'm not making excuses, and what I did was bad and terrible and everything else, but there's always a reason why people do something, and I
Yeah.
got involved in that. I was under pressure. I found out by mistake, and I mean, there's certain things I can talk about now, and certain things I can't. I'm happy to
Of
talk
course.
about it.
Yeah.
Because it's 19 years ago now. But I laugh, but my whole involvement in the drugs business is the only thing I haven't been successful from start to finish was 10 days. And when you are arrested for an offence
Wow.
and you're thrown in custody and all the stuff that goes with it, eventually, before you go to trial, you get all the prosecution paperwork so you can see what's gone on. And those people watched, it's quite clear. HMRC were already watching the people I was involved with, and me being a bloody idiot, trying to get rich quick, it didn't work out. I was caught immediately, and I actually had. When I was sentenced to 12 years, I was so angry because I thought I was only going to get 5 or 6 years. I mean, that was bad enough. But you see, I had 2 real problems. The first problem was when I was arrested, you can't say anything because the people you're dealing with, you can't. I couldn't dig myself out because I'd have dug somebody else in, and I had a young family.
And then
And
have
it was
come for
quite
you
clear.
or the family or
Yeah. And the other thing was that, Vic was a friend of mine. He'd already done a 12-year sentence for illegal importation a few years before. And I really thought, he's got a chance of getting 20 years, and I wasn't going to be part of that.
he was a repeat offender.
So my whole stance from day one, right the way through, was no comment, no comment, no comment. Every question I was asked was no comment because I was frightened, not for me. Terrible things go on, and we all know about it. And so, and the problem was, as strange as this sounds, they went to my house They saw the cars I had and everything else, and they said, "Oh, career criminal. Yeah, he's obviously been under the radar for years, you know."
Which obviously wasn't the case.
No. I mean,
Obviously,
because apparently I didn't fit the profile. Businessmen who get into trouble don't go and do drug deals. And I kind of thought, well, tell John DeLorean that, you know. I mean,
well, yeah,
you
yeah,
know, I mean, people do. A lot of people who get into the sort of serious finance, they blow their brains out. I did something really silly because I had the opportunity to do it. I had the
yeah,
contact to being able to do that,
sure.
and I regretted it forever. But as the cocaine they got tested it was 98% pure. So that put us right next door to the Colombians, and that's a real problem when
Yeah.
you're in front of the judge and whatever. And obviously, I couldn't dig myself out without putting somebody else in, and I wasn't going to be responsible for Vic Lee getting 20 years. But you know, it's like all this stuff, and I can say so now, 20 years down the road, when they're talking about the sort of sentences they hand out, there's all sorts of stuff goes on behind the scenes because people do deal things I know about.
Yeah.
And I went into court for sentencing, and we'd already been moved from Buckinghamshire because we were pinched in High Wycombe of all places, but they
Right.
moved us up to London, and that puts in Southwark Crown Court. And anyone that goes in Southwark Crown Court doesn't get less than 10 years. So all the worst cases go in there in the Old Bailey. And so you said you weren't going to do that. My wife's making signals at me now. But yeah, so we ended up there. And the worst part about it, I got 12 years. But
Wow.
I also got fined £1.9 million. And the worst part of £1.9 million was that if I didn't pay that at the end of my 12 years, I would do another 10. So in real terms, that meant, in fact, it wasn't 12 years because I got a year off because I hadn't had any previous record. So I got 11 years. That means I had 5.5 years to do. At the end of the 5.5 years, if I couldn't prove my innocence from the proceeds of crime thing, that I would get another 5 year, 10 years, of which I'd serve 5 on the end of it.
Jeez.
That was colossal. And the other problem was that British law, as we all know, if you're innocent and to prove guilty, with the Proceeds of Crime Act, it's round the other way. So you're guilty. If we say you've had 2 million quid illegally, then you have to prove you haven't. And that was the thing. And that was the killer. They take everything you've got anyway. They take everything. I mean, they take, you know, even the household furniture. They sent a valuer in and they valued it all up, and they said, right, half of it's your wife's, the other half, if you want to keep it, you have to buy back off you. They take your house, they take everything. They give you a year to move out the house when you come out. I mean, but it took me years with forensic accountant there to prove that the money I'd had, luckily all my company accounts were all up in order and everything. And 3.5 years into my sentence, we went back to court. I mean, I went to court probably a dozen times, but we finally went to court in front of the sentencing judge, Lord Justice Stewart, it was, who sentenced me. And he was sitting at Guildford when we finally heard they accepted, you know, the situation. So my fine got reduced from 1.9 million to 38,000, and that was because they'd uncovered some tax discretions. Something I'd done that was a bit iffy, but it was nothing to do with drugs. But you know, when that judge got the paperwork from the prosecution, because obviously they agreed with these forensic accountants. I mean, I had a laptop in prison, can you believe? So I could look at all these accounts on Sage and whatever else. And the barrister and the accountants used to come in once a fortnight, run through this stuff. And when that judge read the sheet, I thought, I need you to just look up and look at me in the eye and tell me you got it wrong, because he should have never listened. Drugs are a terrible thing. And I didn't know. I mean, I knew about drugs. I tried them when I was young. I didn't like them. But when you go to prison, you see the damage they do, because you have to do courses and there are people in there. And let me tell you, prison is a terrible place. I mean, I was in 9 of them, 9 different ones, the worst ones in the country. And they had me in 6 weeks. I'd have never committed another offence again after 6 weeks.
Really?
It was so horrible. The noise and the squalor in those London prisons, you know, it's just...
I can't imagine.
No, you wouldn't want it. And, you know, I reckon it put 20 years on my life. That time. I mean, we ended up well, not ended up, we got to Belmarsh pretty quickly, which is top jail, because if you commit a certain offence, you're categorised A, B, C or D prisoner. And you start as A and you're in the top prisons because of the level of the offence.
Right.
And after we were sentenced, they downgraded me to a B. And I was actually still with Vic, and actually being with Vic was quite, particularly when we were in Belmarsh, because he'd spent, I think, 2.5 years in there in '92, and he still knew some of the officers and people. But being around Vic and some of his guys kind of gave me a bit of protection. You know, they're not nice places, a lot of violence. I mean, don't get me wrong, I wasn't frightened, but, you know, stuff goes on in those places. And while I was with that crew, I was kind of under their wing. But I made a decision after I was sentenced that I was kind of being tarred with the same brush.
Right, you were being thrown in with them almost.
Yeah, it was like I was, oh yeah, he's one of the drug dealing lot. And I knew the only way I was going to get through the system quickly was I had to separate myself from them. But by doing that, I was exposing myself, because usually from Belmarsh, if you've got a certain length of sentence, you're sent to a prison on the Isle of Sheppey. I can't remember what it's called. But for me, I could also elect to go to Parkhurst, which was on the Isle of Wight, that no one wants to go to because it's a Victorian prison. It's difficult to get to for visiting. And it's usually what they call a punishment move. But I thought, I don't know, Isle of Wight, Kim to visit me, down the M3, just get on the Hover ferry across. So I elected to go there, and it was probably the best thing I ever did. Although it was a nasty place, I always got good jobs in prison, and within a year I moved from B to C, and then I went to a hellhole in Hemel Hempstead. Jesus, that's where all the sort of petty gangsters are and the muggers, you know, the people who got 5, 6, 7 years, you know, they're absolute nonsense places. I went there. I got quite a good job there, but I got released there on day release. I mean, if people knew some of the things were as part of a C category prison's kind of targets, they have to let people out on license for visits and things. They have to do it. But the problem is when they let people out on license, most of them never come back. They scarper.
They leg it.
But my mother had been ill, and I'd applied to go and see my mother because she was ill in hospital in Chichester. And they usually take you out with, a couple of guards or something, because I still had 4 years to serve of the sentence, and was in a closed prison. And I went up before this risk board and to go and see my mother, thinking I was going to be shackled to somebody. And basically, after an hour's questioning, they said, "Well, we'll need your wife's registration number." And they all knew my wife because she used to come in with my daughter every week to visit me. And Kim was always polite to them, and I was always polite to the staff. And I had a good job in there. And anyway, I won't go into all that. But basically, I said, "What do you need my wife's registration number?" She said, "Well, she'll pick you up, won't she, and take you back?" I said, "Well, yeah." I said, "I thought I'd be going out with a couple of officers." They said, "No, no, you'll come back, won't you, Jerry?" I said, "Well, yeah, of course I will." So they gave me an 8-hour license. Kim came and picked me up, went down to Chichester, saw my mother. But when you're on license, you're only given a certain amount of hours. And
Right.
if you're late, you'll never get another one. It goes against you. So I had to go from Hemel Hempstead, M25, A3 down to Chichester, worst roads in the country. So
Yeah.
I was worried I was going to be back late. So I got back early, about 3 hours earlier than I needed to. And I was speaking to one of the governors about a week later, and he said, "Oh, did you see your mother?" I said, yeah, I went to see her. I said, "I really appreciate it. It was great." I said, "She's not doing well." But I said, I was so worried I was going to be late. I ended up getting back 3 hours early. He said, "Yeah, well, we wondered about that." I said, "Well, it's purely the traffic. I couldn't be late." He said, "Well, that's all right, because now you've been out once and come back, we can let you out for a weekend."
Hey. Okay.
They were happy to let me out because they knew I'd come back.
Well,
Because a
yeah.
lot of people they let out. I mean, the madness that goes on with these prisons.
That's crazy, isn't it?
I knew I wasn't, and I had very responsible jobs in there and stuff. So having let me out for the weekend, they then had to give me a category D, which means you can go to an open prison. And an open prison and a closed prison is chalk and cheese.
Right. Yeah.
And I got a job before I went to the open prison in the housing department. I was taken to this open prison to do a specific job. But instead of going in one of those white vans, they said, "Well, we've got you in Spring Hill. We got you to do a job there." Because obviously, if they can get an inmate to do a job, or a prisoner to do it, it saves them employing someone. So it could save them 30 grand a year. And I could do some of the clerical jobs. So they said, they said, "Can Kim give you a lift up there?" I said, "Yeah." They said, "We'll give you a couple of hours to have some lunch." So this is not going to believe this, but so Kim's come to pick me up to take me to the open prison. I've got my license, and we stopped and had some lunch, and we've driven up to Spring Hill, which is near Bicester, and pulled up outside this reception, which is where all the prisoners get off the van and they're taken into. So I've driven up in Kim's car, got out the car, run into reception, and stood there. And the guys looked up and said, "Oh, can I help you, sir?" I said, "Oh, yes, my name's Mahony. I'm due here today." "Oh, right, you've come to see somebody, have you?" I said, "No, I've come from the Mount and I'm here now." Sorry, you worked at the Mount?" I said, "No, I'm a prisoner." "What do you mean you're a prisoner?" I said, "Well, I'm a prisoner and I'm coming here now to finish my sentence." He said, "Well, haven't you just driven up in that car out there?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, what's going on?" I said, "Well, I've got a license. I've been out a few times. They give me a license." "Well, you can't do that." Anyway, all hell's broken loose. And somebody's come over, a senior officer's come over and said, "Right, what's going on?" He said, how come you driven up? I said, well, I've got a license here. Look, my wife's picked me up and brought me. He said, but you're driving. I said, I'm allowed to drive. I've got insurance. I haven't lost my license. He said, you should have come in a van. He said, how long have you got left of your sentence? I said, well, I've got 3 years, 8 months to serve. He said, well, you can't come here. I said, what do you mean I can't come here? He said, well, we don't take anyone under 2 years. I said, well, I'm here. I said, I'm here to do a job. They haven't just let me go, you know. I said, it's been arranged. I said, well, who's it been arranged with? Anyway, I told them that. Somebody came over and they got it sorted out. But it caused me a lot of grief at the time because the officers didn't want me there. They thought I'd be trouble and I'd run away. But of course I didn't.
Yeah.
And that's where I ended up. And that was sort of that. And I spent the last 3.5 years doing that. I mean, they had me working in the Citizens Advice Bureau in Oxford as a serving prisoner.
Wow.
They took me to London and they trained me, the Citizens Advice Bureau, and I was in there working for a year.
Wow.
And I mean, with certain prisoners, they do actually, you know, they know you're not a fucking raving lunatic and you're going to go around murdering people. They do get you doing things. And, you know, I was, for a year, I worked in the Citizens Advice. Then I was running the transport for the officers. I was driving a minibus, all sorts of different things, you know. I'm not saying it was great. Don't get me wrong. The whole thing was your worst nightmare. But, you know, I've got some really funny stories, but I can't go into them now, obviously. But stories.
Wow.
But, you know, I mean, that was a moment, me getting involved in that whole thing was bloody stupid and irresponsible, but I paid a massive price. It wiped me out financially because they take everything. Forget the fine. They take everything. So effectively, when I was released in 2010, because I'd done half my sentence, you know, I was penniless again. So I had to start all over again.
Wow.
You know, it's the third time I've wiped myself out in my life. Well, I tell you, I hit the ground running. I got back into cars because I don't like selling cars, but I've always been quite good at it, unfortunately. And as I've got older, I've hated it more because I find the public are quite difficult to deal with now. But anyway, I did that, but then I managed to take over a kind of rundown antique centre in Hartley Whitney, and that really was a restaurant in it as well. And I ran that, and that, I mean, that lost money for about 4 or 5 months. I turned that round, and that was a fantastic business. And the restaurant was good there, and that was a great business. It was 10,000 square feet, the building, an old coaching inn, and it leaked like a sieve in terms of, I put 2 new gas boilers in, trying to get the place warm in the winter, and we ran them 24 hours a day, couldn't get it warm. I wouldn't want to be there now because I think it costs a fortune to heat. But it was kind of a business where I had all these rooms, great big old hotel coaching in sort of place, and you rent out rooms to dealers, or you might take a cabinet or a whole room or whatever. And then I ran the centre with my staff, and we ran the restaurant. It was a great business, got really busy. And I dealt in gold, would you believe, buying gold and jewellery and stuff like that. And I enjoy antiques, you know, I love antique furniture. And so it was good. And that got me back, you know, firing on all four and back to life. But unfortunately, with the conviction and, you know, after I was sentenced initially, the BRDC had written to me and, you know, said that rightly my case was going up in front of the directors, and what Roger Lane Knott was asking me to do was resign, which I did because I'd have got thrown out anyway. Sure. But, you know, I just felt when I came out with the offence I'd committed, you know, the embarrassment and shame, and I felt a lot I let a lot of people down, particularly some of my friends and my family. You know, my wife didn't know anything about it. In fact, when the customs came to the house and said, your husband's been arrested for drugs, she said, no, you got the wrong house. Wouldn't be my husband. It was sort of that situation. And,
Wow, it's
you
tough.
know, I was supported by my family through my sentence, you know, which my kids, which was good. And, you know, I'm too embarrassed really to get amongst it anymore.
Mm.
Although I've had loads of invite, and the BRDC have said they don't want me back, or they, in fact, it was worse than that. They wrote me a really horrible letter saying that I wouldn't even get in now with my results, which is I was absolutely insulted by, and I had to send them a copy of the bulletin from '92 where I finished third in the Gold Star and fourth in the Silver Star. You know,
Mm.
so quite apart from that, I mean, they have a drivers committee, and I'm too old, too far removed. 20 years ago, I mean, the president of the BRDC now wasn't even a member when I was. I mean, I was a member for 20 years.
Um, it it
I
just
wish I still was, but they won't. They won't have me. So
it just feels like a massive overreaction. I mean, I can understand, you know, it's not a great look, and but you know, I mean, for them to send you a really sort of nasty letter like that. I mean, obviously, I'm not privy to the contents of it,
no,
and that's between you and them, and that's fine. But it just, you know, from the information that we've spoken about over the last week or so, I mean, it feels wholly
well,
unnecessary.
you know, I did a
The,
bad thing,
the degree, yes, which
and I
everyone
was
understands.
sentenced for it, and
Yeah,
I paid my sentence. Not only that, it was a long time ago. I mean, I've been out of jail for 12 years, for God's sake.
yeah,
You know, so it was a one-off. I paid a massive price.
yeah,
The British judicial system says you know, I've served my sentence, but the BRDC, for some reason, feel that I haven't, you know, and yet all the
yeah.
members I've bumped into, I haven't bumped into that many, unless they're all two-faced. They all say, "Oh, we'd love to see you again," and you know, that's
Yeah.
all I get. But
Well, everyone makes mistakes. Everyone's made
yeah,
a mistake. No one in the world has never made a mistake.
yeah, exactly.
Um, why keep raking it up? As you said, it was a silly thing. You're involved for a small amount of time. You've had a huge penalty. It's and you've done it.
Yeah,
Everyone's
yeah.
moved
No,
on.
it's I haven't really talked about it before, especially in open company. But
Yeah,
you know, it was. I think I paid a massive penalty for my
yeah,
involvement,
absolutely.
and
And I think everyone. I mean, Paul Linfoot's just commented. He's just said, you know, well done, Jerry. It takes guts to talk about it, and I think everyone would agree with that. And everyone's very grateful
sure,
that you have come out and spoken about it
yeah,
because, as Paul says, you know, it's not an easy subject. It takes guts, and there's some people in the BRDC or in some other places that still have a problem with it. But I think the
and
vast,
quite
vast,
rightly so.
vast
I mean,
majority, anyone who watches this,
yeah,
will come down on your side, my side.
yeah. But you know, I think people have a
Absolutely.
right to have a problem with what I did. You
Yeah,
know,
of
I
course,
know
of
people
course.
who do have a problem. I understand it, but you know, as I say, I don't. It's not until you get close to drugs, really close, that you understand the real damage they do. But I've never lived in that world. You know, it
Yeah,
was put to me as a kind of commercial deal, and I did it on that basis. Had I known now, or when I was in jail, had I known then what I knew then, sort of thing, I
yeah.
probably wouldn't have done it.
If you
And
knew
something
better.
else I'd say, I'm glad I was caught, and there's not many people would say that. And I tell you why I'm glad I was caught, because if I hadn't been caught the first time, I might have done it again. Because what I
You
was
get away with it.
getting,
Hmm,
yeah, what I was getting out of it wouldn't have dug me out of my hole, that's for sure. But it
sure.
would have gone some way. So I might have done it again.
And it
I
might
didn't
have
get the
failed.
chance, you know, and I was, without being rude, I was fucked from the start because they were being watched anyway, you know,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
there's different theories on that as well. So, but we're not going into that.
Yeah.
But
yeah, personally, yeah, thank you for talking about it. I mean, we obviously very much appreciate
sure.
being so open about it, and anyone who sees this will absolutely agree. I am 100% sure on that. I've just seen a lovely comment from your daughter, and she just said, always proud of you, Dad." So
Oh, that's nice. That must be Emma.
It is Emma. It is.
I got 2 daughters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Emma's the youngest one.
Yeah. That's lovely. That's lovely. And I'm just going to add another thing here before we move on, just to wrap up with some funny stuff. We got like Graham Cuthbert. He said you've taken a brave step tonight and shown a great deal of humility and genuine regret. You must go back to an event these days if you have nothing to be ashamed of. You made a mistake in the past and served your punishment. Exactly that. I think we can all agree with that.
Good.
I think everyone would love to see you back at an event.
Well, I probably will go back. Yeah. I'll probably go back to, mind you, I might not be able to. Now I've told the guys the Gauss story, I'm probably banned from touring cars.
Oh, just avoid Alan. It's fine. Well, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I think there's a super touring event coming up in July at Brands Hatch, which I'm going to be heading to, which is going to be superb. So that's one. Oh, James Harmon has just said 100% agree with the above. Yes, absolutely, James, we do. Right, okay. We've got to lighten the mood. We've got a couple of stories that I really want you to share with everyone, because I mean, we've been going for over 3 hours, but it's no problem for me.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. My wife says I ramble on.
No, it's absolutely fine. Okay, there's ones that I want to handpick here.
Okay.
Firstly, the Snetterton helicopter situation. That one's got to be told. Will Hoy.
Oh, yeah.
Will Hoy and the balloon. We've got to tell that. And I think the rice and the pipe. I think they're the ones,
right. Okay.
They're the ones that have got to be told.
So the
strap in, folks. This is brilliant.
Yeah, the Snetterton helicopter incident actually happened in '89, and it was a touring car race we were up there for. But it was one of those weekends where I think we tested on the Friday, qualified on the Saturday. There was nothing happening on the Sunday, but we were racing on the bank holiday Monday. So Sunday was a down day. And down days, when you're up, you don't go home, you're sort of in the motorhomes and generally larking around. And one of the things that I'd promised to do was take some of the mechanics and the engine, I think David Mountain as well, Mountain up in the helicopter. Anyway, it was quite late in the afternoon at Snetterton, and I said I'd take some of the lads up. I put 4 of the lads in, and I said, come on, we'll go for a fly round. So I fired the Jet Ranger up, got them all aboard, and we took off and were sort of zooming around Norfolk. But the sun was actually quite low. Right. And I'm in the helicopter, and I said to the guys, I said, look how low the sun is. I said, if I go over to the east and we come out the east, I said, I'll wind the aircraft up to 150 knots, which is about 180 miles an hour. I said, I'll get down low about 30 feet. And I said, I'll go across the top of the paddock, and they won't see us coming because I'll come out of the sun. So they all thought this was a good idea. So I got down low, pulled in the power on the Jet Ranger, and got this thing up to 150 knots. And we've come across the paddock at 180 miles an hour at 30 feet. Well, the downwash from the rotor and the noise and everything, and people are there with barbecues, cups of coffee, and everything's gone everywhere, as you can imagine, as we come across it. But what I didn't realize at that precise moment is, at that time, Jackie Stewart, I think it was called Paul Stewart Racing, but they were running David Coulthard, either in Formula 3 or Vauxhall Lotus. But and they had this new Arctic with this beautiful awning on the side of it. But as I'd gone across the top of the paddock, I'd opened up their awning like a tin of sardines. And I didn't know that at the time. And anyway, I've come in and come to land. I mean, there's coffee and people screaming, and but they all knew it was me because I was always doing something crazy. But it was kind of everyone took it in good spirit, except as I've landed and I'm shutting it all down. The turbines winding down. All the guys have got out, but I've seen this figure strutting across the grass towards the helicopter, and I thought, who's that? And I thought, fuck me, that's Jackie Stewart. What's he striding over here like that for? So I sort of, the helicopter's wound down. I'm just getting out and sort of closing the door. And Jackie Stewart's come up and he said, Jerry fucking Mahony, in all my years in Formula One, I've never seen anyone do anything as fucking stupid as that. So I said, I looked at him and I said, wow. I'll take that as a compliment then, Jackie. And he stormed off. I'd opened up his awning like a sardine can. So I had to buy a new awning, and there was the normal nonsense going on with that. But that was actually quite amusing. I've never seen anyone so angry. But I thought it was great that he spent so long in Formula One, and I was the maddest guy he'd ever seen. I mean, I definitely
especially the era that he was in as well. I mean,
yeah.
I've just got to say that is the third time that I've heard that, and it just gets me every time. It's brilliant. I can just picture him storming across the field. Oh.
What was the other one? What was the other story you got them written down?
There was another one. I like the Will Hoy with the
Will Hoy. Yeah.
I mean, we love Will. Like, I met him when I was very young, and what lovely man.
Yeah, well, I mean, no one's got a bad word to say about Will. No. Will was a really genuinely nice guy, and when I got kind of bombed out of touring cars, he was probably one of the only ones that used to sort of come up to me and say, "You okay?" I mean, a lot of those guys I raced against, some of whom I've beaten, they were being paid £300,000 and £400,000 a year or more in the super touring era, and I didn't meet all that, but Will was always genuinely quite concerned. He used to run the Alfa Romeo driving days and stuff like that, and he always used to ring me up and get me on those and things like that. So he was a genuinely nice guy, and he was a prankster, but he was quite, he was a bit reserved with it, because he was a rugby man, so he had all the jolly japes and things, but he'd one day he was larking around in a driver's meeting, and Rob went to sit down in a chair, Rob Gravitt, and he pulled the chair out, and Rob had gone on the floor and actually dislocated his shoulder. Ooh. And there was terrible grief, because I've never had a dislocated shoulder, but apparently it's really painful. And Rob has a weak shoulder from when he used to motocross. So he had to go down to the hospital, and he couldn't race properly the next day. So Will wasn't anti, playing pranks on people, but it was a bit more reserved and not quite as out there as him. But we were up at Alton Park, and I wanted to get him back because he'd done a couple of things, and it was all good-humoured stuff. And I'd spoken to my mechanics, and apparently if you get an ordinary balloon and you fill it up with acetylene, you get having filled the balloon with acetylene, you get a spark plug, and you put the spark plug in the balloon and tape it in, and then go open somebody's bonnet, pull a spark plug lead off the engine, and then put it on the spark plug that you've put in the balloon, put the balloon in the car, shut the bonnet, and then wait and see what happens. So I did this. I managed to nick Will's keys when he was out testing out of his anorak. I've whizzed over to the car park with this balloon with the spark plug. I think it was a BMW who was driving at the time. Ooh. I've opened the bonnet, put this balloon in, taken an HT lead off and put it on the end, shut the bonnet, and then told everyone in the paddock, or quite a few of the people, what I'd done. And of course, the end of the day came, and everyone was sort of going to go home, but a few of us were camped out. Will got in his car, went to start it, and it blew the fucking bonnet off. So, not quite off, but it had a defined out. And of course, he didn't know what had happened, because when the balloon explodes, it sort of disintegrates. So you look under the bonnet, and all you've got is, well, an HT lead hanging off. You know, you don't know what else. But there was so much laughter going along around. I was kind of on the floor in tears. A couple of the other guys were, because Harvey was normally involved. Well, I mean, although Tim comes over sweetness and light as the commentator, he was just as mad as the rest of us. I mean, he was always involved in. He was better at towing the corporate line when it counted, but Tim was always up for it. And we used to just be in tears. I mean, Tim and I had a race on the road back from Alton Park one day, and he had a black 3-door Cosworth. I had my RS 500, and we raced all the way from Alton Park back to the M6. And oh Christ, I mean, you'd be locked up now. Some of the things that were going on up the pavement and all sorts of things. And because we got on the M6.
That's not a short run, is it? That's quite a long trek.
Yeah, it is. We're racing down the M6. But of course, a Cosworth, as soon as you get it on the rev limiter, it's about 155, it would go on the rev limiter. And it would be, the back would start dipping. But we were on the M6, and suddenly this Aston Martin's come up behind, flashing its lights. And it's come alongside, and it's Marshall in his V8 Aston Martin. He's given me the finger at 150 miles an hour, changed up a gear, and fucked off into the distance. I mean, that's the sort of nonsense. I mean, Marshall was he was a real character. You know, he was and very instrumental in my early racing. I mean, he was kind of a bit of a mentor for me. Not just driving, but drinking as well. You know, he was not impressed with my conviction at all.
Well, no,
he really wasn't. I mean, he was very anti, which so I heard. I understand, but anyway, we're not on the depressing stuff. We're on the laughing stuff. So that was another thing. Will Hoy's bonnet. But the other thing about explosions, because I used to like explosions, which you covered, was when I'd been out in Hong Kong, I'd bought these cracker things. They're supposed to be like British banger fireworks, but they were like 20 times more powerful. And I mean, God, you wouldn't even be able to bring them on a flight now. You get thrown in jail. But in those days, I'd brought a couple of boxes of these bloody things back. They were like thunder flashes. But I used to keep them and use them. And I think this particular night, it was Snetterton again. It was because there was Lawrence Bristow and Tim Harvey and me. And it must have been 89 again. And we'd gone round to Attleborough, and which is a small village behind Snetterton.
Yeah.
We were staying in the motorhomes, but we'd gone to a Chinese restaurant. And we were in there. We'd all had too much to drink, as was normal. And we were generally larking about. But Lawrence had got up to go to the loo. And I'd brought one of these fucking sticks of dynamite out with me, basically. And I said to Tim, hang on, I'm going to put this in Lawrence's rice. So I hid this sort of stick of dynamite in his rice with just the blue touch paper sticking out, which I didn't like. We all used, well, I used to smoke when So Lawrence has come back to the table, and we're just sort of talking. I'm sitting there smoking with my cigarette, and I've said, "Oh, what's that guy? Look at that girl over there," you know, and to divert Lawrence's attention. But as he's looking over there, I've got my cigarette and I've lit the blue touch paper on this dynamite, and then I've just carried on talking to him. Anyway, this thing has gone off, and this rice has gone everywhere. Bristow has got molten rice stuck to his face. It's all up the walls. It's all on the ceiling. I mean, it's covering us, other customers, and in all this rice. And this Chinaman has come out the kitchen with a machete. And he's come out, you fuck! You had no respect for my restaurant. What you do? What you do to my restaurant? And you get out, you get out. And he's waving this machete around. And I've kind of gone, I'm all of a sudden sobered up and gone very nonchalant. And sort of, well, you're not going to hit me with that, are you? Because you're going to kill me or whatever. No, I got police. I'd be here many years. You do this to my restaurant. And we're all sort of falling back. Anyway, the next thing is the police has arrived. So we've all instantly sobered up, and police had come over to the table and said, "What's going on here?" I said, "Well," I said, "I've never. I said, I'm shocked. I said, we've come up here to race to Norfolk. I said, and we come in a restaurant, and I said, I'm being threatened by a machete. This machete wielding chef from the kitchen." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, we had an accident with some rice and whatever." I said, "Next thing is this guy's threatening to attack me with a machete." He said, "He came out here with a machete." I said, "Yeah." So the police have gone in the kitchen and they've arrested the Chinaman and taken the Chinaman off. And I felt so sorry for him. I thought, this poor little guy running his little restaurant. And but they didn't keep him. It was all fairly tame.
Oh, goodness me.
That was
oh my word.
Well, I mean, it's the sort of nonsense went on. Bristow was also, unfortunately, at Silverstone. Lawrence Bristow was quite an interesting character because he was quite a good racer. Certainly could hold his own. Never really got any credit for being a good racer because he came from a very wealthy family, and he was quite extreme in some of his ideas, but he also smoked a pipe, which was quite unusual for a racing driver in his 30s. And he used to sit there puffing away at a pipe. And I think, as you've probably heard on these stories before, in those days, we used to sort of put all the motorhomes together at the circuit, and we'd all get together and get pissed and stuff like that. So this particular night we were at Silverstone, and Lawrence was showing us this new pipe he bought and paid 700 quid for because it was made out of some special wood and he was very proud of it, and he was puffing away on it. But of course, like most pipers, they smoke and then they kind of put it down and in an ashtray, and they don't do it. But anyway, he'd finished smoking it, but he decided he was going to get up and go to the loo, and he went in his motorhome to go to the loo. In the meantime, I've got hold of his pipe, I've dropped my zip, and I've stuck my better manly parts in the end of his pipe. And when he came out, I was actually relieving myself through his pipe, his new 700 quid pipe, to the delight of all the other guys that were there. And he absolutely, I mean, he took it in good spirit, but of course he never used the pipe again. End of his 700 quid pipe. So that was another story.
Oh God. Oh, me. Paul Linfoot has just said, "I've told many people that Jerry's a bit mental, and I think most will understand me now."
Well, it wasn't sort of mental. It was fun.
It's fun. Oh,
I mean,
God, I'm completely sorry.
Fun can often brim over, and it did in Macau in 1990 because that was another kind of one of my things that got out of control. So Julian Bailey, who was racing in 1990 for Lotus in Formula One, he raced for Tyrrell as well.
Tyrrell, yeah.
I'd got to know him quite well, and he was one of the Rat Pack people with Perry McCarthy and those other guys.
Blundell and Warwick and all those guys, wasn't it? Yes.
Yeah, but Julian I got to know quite well, and I tried to do a deal for him with a Quati in Italy to go on the Lotus for the Monaco Grand Prix. And I nearly got it together, but we left it all a bit too late. And in the end, we didn't get it together. But I did a few things with Julian. Anyway, Julian ended up somehow, and I don't know how, but Vic Lee was taking 2 BMWs to Macau, and was getting sponsorship from Watson's Water, who were a massive company out there, and they sponsored about 6 cars every year for the gear race. And 2 Vic Lee BMWs. Tim Harvey was in one, Julian was in the other, but Julian was a kind of a Grand Prix driver. And a couple of things happened. Vic, in 1990, I was very friendly with him, and I've made a mistake not running with him in 1990 because he ended up running Jeff Allen. And I'd made the decision to run with Kennedy, which was actually a bad move. But anyway, Vic said, look, why don't you come to Macau and you can help Julian sort of settle into the car, and because I'd race M3s and I sort of generally help him. So I said, okay. And it was kind of a bit of, for me, it was a jolly, it was at the time though where I wasn't necessarily in a good place deep in my head. So we all roared off to Macau. But one of the jobs that I seemed to get landed with, every night we'd go out with all the mechanics and go and find some restaurant on the island. And we had this minibus, it's Toyota minibus. And we're all loaded in this, and we'd been out for something to eat. Of course, I was driving and generally misbehaving as one does. And we're at this set of lights, and I'm driving the Toyota minibus, or whatever it was, on the inside. And on the outside of us was some funny little Datsun or something. So all the mechanics are in the back going, come on, Jerry, come on, you can race him, you can race him. So when the lights turned green, we set off, and we're kind of racing down the road as best as you can race in a minibus. But the 2 lanes went into one lane further up the road. So my little man in his Datsun was kind of going to run out of road. And me being me, I wasn't going to lift. So the end result, this Datsun ended up T-boned across the front of this minibus with me, with my foot in. I still wasn't lifting at this stage. And anyway, eventually I thought I'd better stop. And he's kind of pulled round and got out, and he's got out and he's come round to the window. Chinaman, of course, going absolutely ballistic. And I didn't speak not even a word of Chinese. And he's waving his arms around. He's got his wallet out, and he's, I don't know, showing me some sort of card. But I thought, I'm bored with this. Come on, let's go. So I went to drive off, and he's now hanging on the front windscreen wipers of this minibus. And I'm driving off down the road, first gear, second gear, accelerating, third gear. He's still on there. So I said, oh, well, I've got to stop, because if he falls off, I'll run him over. So I stopped, and he's got off, and I've driven off again. So that was fine. We've gone back to the hotel, gone to bed. In the morning, I'm still in bed, and there's a knock on my door. There's Vic's at my door. He said, right, we've got a fucking problem. He said, the hotel is surrounded by police with machine guns. He said, and through the manager, they're after what went on last night with the minibus. So you need to sort it out. That's what he's saying to me. We're going up to because they had qualifying price. I said, well, you go off with the mechanics and I'll stay and sort it out. So the manager's come up to the room, and he said, oh, you've got to come down, the police. I said, listen, I've just woken up. I'm going to have a shower. I'm going to shave. I said, when I'm ready, I'm going to come down to reception. I said, I'm a guest in your country. I said, no one's frog marching me off anyway. So anyway, I got up and aftershave and all that sort of stuff. Gone down to reception. And the hotel manager is like an interpreter. Basically, they want to arrest me. So they've arrested me and taken me off to the police station at Macau. And I can't understand a word they're saying. And they've got an interpreter in, or someone who spoke English. And they're saying that last night I was involved in a hit and run accident. And I'd hit a car and driven off. And the car I'd hit, wait for it, was an off-duty policeman. So I thought, oh shit. So I thought, well, how am I going to play this? So I said, I did the sort of usual nonchalant, how dare you? I've come out here to race. I
So
said,
offended.
yeah, I did the offended sort of. I was cut up by some car and I hit him, but I said I stopped. And they said, no, no, you didn't stop. You drove off. I said, no, I stopped. No, no, no. And I'm looking, every time I'm talking, they're going next door into another office. And I can see through the glass that they're talking to this Chinese guy who was obviously the guy that I'd had the altercation with. And they kept coming back and saying, no, you did you did hit and run, you have to go to jail and court. And I said, listen, you tell them I can prove I didn't, that I stopped because he was waving a card around. And what I can tell you, from what I remember, there was a picture on that card and he had a white hat on. It was actually his police uniform. So they went back in the room, the other room, and were talking to this policeman in Chinese. And then the next thing I know, he's got his wallet out and he showed them something. And this police chief has started hitting him like this because it's clear that I've seen the picture, and to see the picture, I must have stopped. So they've come back in and they said, oh, yeah, you stopped. You know, they're very. I said, this is disgusting. I said, I want the British consulate here. I said, how dare they get treated like this? I come out to this country, we're running a racing team. I get treated and arrested, treated like a common criminal. So anyway, they're now all bowing and scraping. And they put me in a police car. And I got a sort of siren sort of trip down to the pits with all the lights going, and
Police escort.
sorry, and everything else. So actually, I've got to say, Chinamen don't do very well with me. They always seem to come off worse. So
Yeah, well, that's two.
exactly Chinamen, but
You're definitely 2-0 up. Oh dear.
that
Brilliant.
Watson's Water thing. That I mean,
Brilliant.
they were a big company. They halfway through the weekend, they took us all back to Hong Kong, which was I think 2.5 hours on a hydrofoil or something. And they'd rented the restaurant at the top of this hotel for this dinner. And they brought in the Supremes, you know, the singers.
Diana Ross and all the.
Yeah, they were there singing. And, you know, I mean, this is how big an event it was. I think something happened at the dinner, but I can't remember what it was. I think I misbehaved with there was a dummy with a Watson's Water race suit on, and I had sex with it or something, and
Surely
somebody got
not.
offended.
Surely not.
Especially as I took it from the rear. And then I pulled its arm off and beat it with its own arm. So anyway, that's another side to it.
Oh dear.
I think that's quite a few of the stories.
I've got to breathe. Oh, honestly, I could sit and listen to these.
Talk forever about the stories, but
I could sit and listen to these all night. But I fear we may have to. Oh, we may have
people go to bed, eh?
We may have to wrap up with some fun questions. I mean, just some of the comments. I mean, Marion Speeder said this has got to be in a book. She's also said that Netflix will buy this as a mini series. We've got Josh Ovens. He earlier said that he actually did some work for you on some of his cars and stuff, and he said, "I need to go for a drink with you, Jerry." Yeah, me first. Me, Jerry, and Rob Gravett. Right. We're going to go for a drink. We're going to video it.
Right. Yeah, I know Josh. He's locally here, actually.
Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, Josh. Yeah,
Josh
wants to fight with you. You can get behind me in the queue, Josh. Look, we'll all go out together. Be fun. Marion Speed said that you could be played by Danny Dyer. No, I think I'd like to see that.
No, please. Danny Dyer?
Danny Dyer. Dear me. That'd be interesting.
Well, he's a celebrity, isn't he? Love Island or something?
Apparently so. Yeah.
Oh.
Well, he's more of a celebrity than I'll ever be, so I can't really say much. And Forrest Harry said, this is like a night in a pub with decent company. This is brilliant. Thank you, Forrest. That's very nice of you to say. Right, we're going to wind down. Just some fun questions. We always run down just some fun questions. Some short, quick fire ones. What's the favourite car you've ever raced?
Has to be the RS 500. Has
Yes.
to be.
Excellent answer.
Yeah.
You like that. Your favourite circuit you've ever raced around?
Birmingham.
The Super Prix.
Birmingham Street Circuit.
Yes.
Major.
So glad you said that. So many people said
Fantastic.
Phillip Island and Spa and Bathurst, but Birmingham.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Mental.
Mm.
Absolutely mental. But
I never raced at Bathurst or Macau. I would have liked to have done,
yeah.
but I didn't. I'm sure they're great as well. But I did get to race 88 Birmingham. We qualified till that idiot decided not to get out of his Formula 3 car.
Oh, Russell
Formula
Spence,
3
right? We
cars.
were craned up
Yeah,
in the
that's right. And so we ran out of time.
Yeah.
But we did qualify and race there in '89, and a fantastic circuit. Fantastic.
Bring it back. Gonna start a petition.
Mm.
Okay, here we got here. Okay, is there one series that you'd love to have had a go in, whether it's Aussie V8s or NASCAR or single seater stuff or anything like that? Is there anything you'd love to have had a go in?
Definitely not single seaters. I had a go in sports cars, and if I'm honest, I struggled with the downforce. You know,
Right.
realizing that. I mean, when I did Le Mans, it was a great experience, and I loved it. But it was tough getting your head around how much grip you had with the downforce.
Sure.
So it wouldn't be single seater, but if I had to choose a series now, without any doubt, would be Aussie V8s. I think they're really great to watch.
Yeah, from my point of view, that is absolutely the right answer because I
Yeah.
love it. I'm on the wrong side of the world for it. It's fantastic, isn't it? It's terrific. Fantastic. Okay, final question. I mean, we may have sort of touched on this earlier. And again, we could talk all night, but we can't. Who's the best driver that you've raced against? I mean, you've raced against some of the greats in the touring cars. You've raced at Le Mans and all various different series. Is there one that stands out in your mind as being up there?
Only one man. Only one man.
Steve?
And it's double S.
Steve
Soper.
Yeah, he's
and I never raced against him because I was never quick enough to keep up with him. But I was in races that he was in, but I just I followed his career. He drove the Peugeots when I was heavily involved with that. He was in Macau in 2004 in a Peugeot when I was there, and I've watched him actually at Goodwood over the last few years, and as I say, he's a legend, and I think he's head and shoulders above anyone else in this country, and having, and he's still on the money. I wouldn't be able to get in a racing car and drive quickly now. I mean, Paul Linford reckons he's going to sit me in an RS 500, but I think he was frightened the life out of me now, but no, without any doubt, Soper. There's a lot of drivers I have respect for, but Soper to me is in a league of his own as far as British drivers go.
Yeah, I mean, he's something. I mean, and he's from the that era, and
Yeah.
he is something else. And he is a lovely, lovely chap as well. He's a really nice guy. I actually went for a coffee with him up in Beaconsfield last year, which was very nice with him.
Well, I haven't seen Steve since I was locked up, and I mean, Rob and Mandy and whatever spend a bit of time with him. I think if he had a problem with me, I'd know, but it's just he wouldn't be impressed with what happened for sure.
Sure.
I hope he's not angry with me and he understands. But we were friends. We weren't great friends, but we did a lot of stuff together, and but to me, he stands out amongst everyone.
Yeah. I don't think he's got the nickname Soperman for nothing, has he?
No.
And I've just seen that Paul Linford has said that he's going to get you back in a 500 if it kills him.
There won't be a seat big enough. I won't fit in. That's how I'll get out of it.
I'm sure he'll find a way around. He'll be fine. I mean, I could talk with you for hours and hours, but I think it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, Jerry. Thank you so much for coming on, having a chat. It's been, as I said,
I've enjoyed it.
I wanted to speak to you since I was 7, and that was a long time ago. So thank you very much.
Well, and thank you for giving me the opportunity, and I appreciate the people who are interested enough to listen in. And as I say, it's great times. I have great memories, and although the racing side of it, there's loads of racing drivers in all formulas who perhaps don't get where they felt they should have get for one reason or another. But despite all that, I consider I had some great results. I had some great times, and I have some really happy memories. And that's what I keep in my heart, so happy memories.
Yeah, and it's lovely to hear that you've got the happy memories, because I know from the comments and from my personal memories, I've got a lot of happy memories of watching you race as well. So
Sure, yeah.
and
Yeah.
but thank you everyone who's tuned in. Thank you
Yeah.
very much again, Jerry. I mean,
Mm.
it's been brilliant. I mean, someone's called for a part 2. I mean, we could look into that. But thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah.
Huge thanks to you, Jerry, as well. It's been absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, it's been good. Thanks very much. Thanks everyone for listening in.
Great stuff. And we'll see you soon, everyone. Have a good rest of the next 7 minutes that's left of today, and and we'll see you very, very soon. Thanks very much, everyone.
Okay. Bye.